My name's Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
My name's Tom Scholey.
We're going to spend a couple of episodes reviewing Dark Knight Returns, just kind of giving our spin on the thing.
It's probably the first graphic novel that I read. Probably read it for the first time 30 years ago, and I've kind of been reading it ever since. Frank Miller, first cartoonist that I really followed and tracked down his work and studied in a way. So Dark Knight's a big part of that.
When we're at conventions, it's almost like referencing Shakespeare in as much as we could talk about page this, panel that, and the other person's going to know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
I was not reading comics in 1986. I show up in probably 88, 89, and I feel like every mainstream comic for the next 20 years bore the influence of Dark Knight Returns. From dark, grim, moody superheroes. Watchmen is another one of those 1986 books that had that impact of like making comic superheroes adult. But for my money, it feels like Dark Knight is the one that really everybody just wore that influence on their sleeve to the point that I was sick of it. Mm-hmm. So tired of it. By the early 2000s, I just wanted no part of this brooding, super serious superhero. And it's a shame in a way because I blame Dark Knight, but Dark Knight stands well on its own. If you take away the influence and just look at it on its own merit, it's a very different experience than thinking about the legacy of the book.
You often will hear about Miller and Moore talk about how their influence, like they're not ashamed of it, but it's tiring to them.
And, their influence is pronounced. Like Joe Quesada, huge influence at Marvel, has talked about Dark Knight is directly responsible for him getting into comics. Mm-hmm. And Jim Lee, huge Frank Miller fan, one of the top guys at DC Comics. So you have these two guys at Marvel and DC even today that trace one of their major influences back to this book.
So this book was made by like 28, 29-year-old Frank Miller, man. He does Daredevil and becomes the belle of the ball. DC Comics gives him an untold amount of money to go make Ronin. It was a flop. When it came out, they probably recouped their investment over the past 35 years or whatever. The comic was a flop. It didn't do what they were hoping that thing would do. He almost did this in order to save his career, man. And he brought back the old team. He got Klaus, Lynn Varley on color duties. In a lot of ways, this is her book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's my first visual note. There are some very strong visual components to this book, and I'm sure we'll unpack them. But it's impossible to overstate Lynn Varley's hands on this book. That's the first thing that I noticed when I first encountered it.
Yeah.
Like, you open this book up, it's a Batman comic. It doesn't look like any Batman comic I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another one that gets watered down with time because so many books, this format, they follow this kind of thing with painters, right?
Yeah.
At the time, man, this could not have been more different in appearance than other books, and it's because of Lynn Varley. You think of like superheroes always had that candy-coated, bright color, saturated colors. That was a staple of superhero comics. This book is practically black and white, especially the beginning. When we're just seeing the city and we're not seeing him in costume, it's gray. Lots of shades of gray, mm-hmm. but it is gray. And you could not contrast against superhero comics more than this book does. It was making a statement from page one that was impossible to ignore.
Can we be honest about page one?
Sure.
When I first read this book, 12 years old, 13 years old, I didn't know what the hell was going on that page, man. You almost needed that little TV screen on page 2 to let you know that there's a race going on and, billionaire, philanthropist, playboy, Bruce Wayne kind of crashing to the side.
I think Chris Ware talks about this. He talks about making experiments in the limits of legibility. And I think Miller does that. Oh, like that page, it's page 1, and it's really hard to follow, and it's up front. But he does that all through this. He takes chances on showing something where it's not exactly clear, where like you have to put it together, and sometimes it takes a few readings to figure it out. It took a lot of readings to figure out what page 1 does, but I think that's really important, and it's something that happens in film a lot. Film takes way more chances on illegibility than comics do, just because it's like easier to bring people back in the thread. But it's an element of this.
Unlike our Otomo coverage, where Katsuhiro Otomo had 6,000 pages to tell his story, when you make a deal with the mainstream publishers, they need to budget this thing out, and there has to be an agreed upon amount of pages in order to tell your story. And Frank Miller wants to tell a pretty rich story, so he is pretty reliant on this like 16 panel grid setup to get his story across.
Yeah, that's one thing when we talk about the influence. I think the influence is huge in those few parceled out splash pages where all of a sudden here's giant Batman. That got copied a lot. The rigorous 16 panel grid, not as much. And that's kind of the thing that makes this thing work, is that you can tell a rich story and have lots of business and waste some panels, potentially waste some panels with illegibility and take chances and have repetition when you have, you know, such a rigorous tiny grid. I mean, you know, it's a special event now when somebody does that thing. I think it was like the Hawkeye comic that everybody like sings the praises of. You know, that was like the big thing of it, was the 16, you know, panel grid.
I love how he uses it. Mm-hmm. You know, he's so good at merging panels together, at breaking, you know, a half panel splash, making it 8 panels, you know, even though it's still on the 16 panel grid, but he really flexes with that grid. He gets a lot of mileage out of it. It's pretty impressive considering that's not a widely used grid. It's not like he's looking at lots and lots of history of how people have used this and stretched it out. Very inventive, you know, I mean, like visually, I think he's always been very accomplished in the storytelling, and that 16 panel grid is noteworthy because of its uniqueness.
I think we have to give some credit to Howard Chaykin. I think that American Flag, it like sort of leads directly to this comic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I have that note. You know, not just in the grids, in that kind of multi-layered storytelling approach, but also in the use of the TV screen as a panel. This book couldn't exist without it, and Chaykin was definitely doing it, you know, a couple years before this.
Big story to tell. He needs to communicate a lot. The most unreadable stuff really is just that page 1. Like I can't think of any other wasted panels in this thing, and the TV screens are used pretty much for exposition. We're establishing Jim Gordon is on the verge of retirement. We're setting the stage, even though Lynn Varley's color, there is no question that it's a sweltering hot summer day or whatever, but they communicate temperature, the social climate, and in a lot of ways, like the great Will Eisner comic, if you read The Spirit comics are not about the Spirit. It's about everybody else, and the Spirit shows up. So we get a lot of these like one-page scenarios where we deal with a day in the life of a character. Usually doesn't end well for them.
Mm-hmm. The other note I have on the TV screen use, rereading this, it reminds me so much of today's media environment. Yeah. There's a lot of talking heads that are editorializing and like yelling at each other. These different points of view, a different political point of view, and it feels very in line with today.
Very much.
That's amazing for he's making this in 1985, 1986. This is predating CNN.
That's what I was wondering.
But it's not predating the Morton Downey Jr. show.
I know it exists, but I still say it's somewhat visionary in that it is very contemporary.
Yeah, it's aged really well in that respect. Yeah,
almost 40 years old. Like it's noteworthy.
There are some you say it ages well in that respect. I'm not going to say it ages poorly in others, but this is a product of the 1980s. Mm-hmm. We could run down the list of references, man. Reagan, Bernie Getz, Guardian Angels, Valley Girl Speak was kind of a new thing. And I read in a way later, 25th anniversary edition introduction that Frank Miller did, he said that Lynn Varley's responsible for doing a lot of the copy editing and revising of the dialogue of the young characters, like the slangs. And if you read the 1985 Frank Miller interview in Comics Journal, he's out there in LA at that point, and information traveled a little slower back in those days, so he had no idea about Valley Girl talk and all that kind of thing. So he's out there, and it's like a different world. It really left a big impression on him, man.
That makes sense. That's one of those things that I don't think ages quite as well, but it's still sort of forward-thinking to try to have some sort of lingo, some kind of fad-like language for the younger characters. And I guess it it doesn't age any worse than if he had been very accurate to whatever slang would have been at the time period.
Yeah, that's not what I'm bringing. I'm just saying that this is a product of the '80s, and these are some of the things. So, like, I'm talking like Dirty Harry, Death Wish.
Death Wish is a big one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought even going back into the late '70s, when you think of New York City, it may be some of its crime-infested
Taxi
worst.
Driver.
Yeah, Taxi Driver's a reference I have listed here, and I mean, Miller would have been in the city.
The
we hear a
blackout.
lot of cartoonists talk about that era and being, carrying extra money in different places, anticipating being mugged or whatever, and it feels like that influences Gotham City in the state that it's in.
Easily, man. And, there will be the blackout of '77 will occur. When we mentioned Death Wish, Lawrence Fishburne in Death Wish, 2 or 3? He's got those, like, little glasses, and those are the glasses that the damn mutants wear, man. So there are visual references as well that he's pulling from here.
Yeah, the book design, just talking about like 80s or the era, like the book design is sort of like Art Deco, like the font and stuff is Art Deco, and there was, like, in the 80s there was this sort of like return to Art Deco. It did sort of come back into vogue, but it's also like a very appropriate choice. Like Art Deco just really works really well with, like, Batman and Gotham City and
And this is something that he brought to the game, because before that there would be buildings with, like, giant, like, typewriters on the roof and stuff. So like the Tim Burton Batman that everybody knows, like, was influenced by this Frank Miller work here.
Yeah, I like they have the Gotham Twin Towers, which are like, the World Trade Center of Gotham City. They dwarf everything around them, but they're not, modernist like the World Trade. They're like these massive, very gothic things, like something that probably doesn't exist.
Gargoyle on every ledge. Upon rereading this thing and knowing that Miller is, 28, 29 years old when he's putting it together, he would be what we would call an old soul with some of the, I guess you could call it satire, because he's basically launching barbs, satirizing psychology, psychiatry. Carrie Kelly's parents are, they're hippie bumpkins who smoking weed all day. Like, and he makes very specific, like, he'll draw the little smoke stream or, like, talk about, like, hey, pass that here and that kind of thing. Yuppies, like,
yuppies are
like
the enemy, and he's talking about his age group,
Right, that's
what
I mean.
I wear trench coats and read detective books, and everybody else around me is vegetarians and into this hippie shit, and I hate it. That's like the point of view. Mentioning Dr. Volper, like, I was sort of wondering, like he is such like a skewered character. Like, Miller so dislikes this character, and he and I thought, like, is this his skewering of pop psychology and things like that. But the more I looked at it, it's like that's in there in the mix. But I think a big part is, like, Dr. Wolper is like he's like a stand-in for Dr. Wortham, and he's like the psychologist who says Batman is terrible. He's a sex fiend or whatever, blah blah blah, and we got to get rid of him. And he sort of I think Miller was kind of channeling that, his feelings about Wortham, this guy who said says we don't want these superheroes, they're corrupting, they're the worst thing about, and a lot of the theories that he proposes are kind of similar to, like, Wortham's theories.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I've been reading various interviews around this time period for Miller, and I remember seeing one of them that a big part of his inspiration was approaching age 30.
Right.
Which, and I guess his mind is getting old, and that was sort of the start. So,
and 50 is geriatric,
right,
to him in this book.
It'd be funny if Batman were like 33, he had been retired for 10 years. But the idea of Frederick Wortham being an influence on a character, I think, is reasonable, because, I mean, there's a lot in this book, so I'm sure it was pieces of ideas that were coming to him and sort of being organized in a somewhat haphazard manner, just having these ideas and how do they fit. He's familiar with comics history. That's a big moment in comics history, and it kind of makes sense to me that he would be lampooning that Frederick Wortham.
And we've been reading this thing forever, and we read it as children in the beginning, so we get pulled into the story and the world of the story and things like that. But I think for Miller approaching this, this was like his big statement on just Batman. Batman, as a character, Batman as a cultural force, and he approached it as, like, how many different things do I have to say about Batman? And he even kind of took input from his friends too. Like he talked to people like Chaykin and stuff. What did you always want to see in a Batman? And so it is almost like I wouldn't say like a crowd sourced kind of thing, but it's like I want to do the ultimate thing on Batman. I want to approach it from every possible angle and fit in everything I can, and I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, and he talks about that a lot. There's so much coverage of Miller around this time period in interviews and promo and previews and things. And he talks about that. Superhero as symbol and how Batman is a much purer symbol of that than, say, Daredevil, another character that Miller's closely associated with. He was very conscious of what you're saying, Tom, and thinking in those terms. And it does come out, and the way you examine a symbol is through all these different lenses and from these different angles, which all of these characters represent those points of view.
So, talking about Daredevil, what better practice? Like if you're gonna escalate to making a Batman thing, he spent all these years making a Daredevil that was like a step away from being a Batman. It's like that was great prep. That was like J.J. Abrams doing 2 Star Trek movies before he did Star Wars. It's like you did the closest thing to Batman, and then you came into Batman. Of course, you're going to knock it out of the park.
He got his 10,000 hours in. You're saying,
sure, yeah.
Just before we move past that, just some other like satirical things that I made note of. He makes fun of just bleeding hearts in general, the government, media for sure, and the youth culture.
Yeah, I even think there's a reference to gentrification. Whenever he tracks down the bank robbers into that one building site, it's condos that are being built there, and we see that sign as they're going in, and I think about it now because like we see all this construction around here, and I'm sure that's New York in the 80s.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's something he was seeing and probably hearing the same kind of frustration that we hear from locals as these things happen and neighborhoods change. So, that's yuppies, that's that whole cycle, and I'm sure he was conscious of it.
Yeah, there's the one real great like yuppie TV screen where the guy's talking about like the problem of the bat and like all this stuff, and they ask him a question that's like off camera, and he's like, "Oh no, I would never live in the city." So he's like, he knows everything that needs to happen in the city, but he's, "Oh, I would never live there." So we talked about the 16-panel grid. We talked about how there wasn't much really to reference that in comics before that. We were talking about the amazing Lynn Varley color. The thing that roots it closest to American comics, to me, really is the John Costanza hand lettering. Great lettering.
And that is what came through to me from this reading this time, was how great the lettering is. Like just, and I don't know what parts are Miller and what parts are Costanza, because sometimes there'll be like a panel that's like crack.
There is the one chase sequence when they're going into those like condos that are building where it's it's more than like 4 tiers worth of panels. It might be like 5 or 6, and Batman's on top of the car and there's scree and like all these car things. That was probably the most adventurous lettering because I actually am not that impressed with John Costanza's lettering in this thing. To me it's a lot of his like by the books. He I wouldn't doubt that he cursed himself that he had to letter so many words on a page compared to the next man or whatever. The page I describe, it's like, is that Costanza or is it Miller? Yeah. Because very often when you see a bubble letter or something, it's traditional comics fucking bubble letter, but then you'll see like the Arkham symbol, and then you see that kind of Greek script in Sin City comics, so that's Miller.
Yeah, the arcade font, for like the arcade signage and stuff. Yeah, like all those things. Page 1, something I noticed for the first time here is like a flaming coffin for Bruce Wayne, and it's like all the things from the Batman mythology. It's like, oh, this is his first escaping a death trap. Like they call it death. Like that's like a Batman thing, escaping from death traps. Page 1, escapes from a death trap. Okay, we cross that off the list.
I really dig how Lynn keeps the colors so kind of like muted and gray and subdued. Certainly whenever you see Gordon, like she doesn't let him get much color at all, and when we see like the superhero colors, like the reds, the yellows, the blues, and then the green, it really means something. Mm-hmm. And she's able to make these transitions too, where it's like we're dealing with like Carrie Kelly, and it's like as poppy as it gets, which is still not as vibrant as your average color. But then you could, on the same page, shift focus to several scenes several times, and like the color corresponds, which is just
it's really an interesting contrast between Gordon and Carrie Kelly, right? Because like from the age point of view, which is a big part of this whole story, is age. you do go from like Gordon is a zombie color wise to the young characters being the most vibrant and colorful.
And it is perfect for, like you said, for cutting back and forth between scenes. And cutting between scenes is like a big thing of this. Like there's so much like splicing and editing and it's physical too. It's not just the rhythm of the thing, but also where he'll stat panels and restat them and insert them in, and it does create this kind of like filmic rhythm and filmic production where looking at these originals, you do see a lot of like panels gouged out and replaced and just moving around those pieces, and it's something I like think about for my own work.
I'm very impressed with the detail orientation of this. And I think, the panels that you're talking about being replaced, like since we have access to an artist edition, we can see that. It's really impressive. Usually Watchmen is the book that's cited as being like meticulously planned out, all the details line up. I find that in Dark Knight. Whether it's, as you say, page 1 being him escaping a death trap, like, okay, that does kind of make sense. Not something I thought of before you said it, but it seems perfectly, there. And there are several characters where we see that, where it's, Gordon talking about, he thinks about Sarah and it's easy. A couple of times this happens, and then he finds
repetition.
Sarah at the end, and suddenly it has greater weight and meaning because he's laid that groundwork leading up to that. And that's a small, there are a lot of these details that are like that are insignificant. I did not notice them on first several readings.
Right, first dozen.
But you realize like it is an attention to detail that I find commendable and that I value in comics, and especially comics that I'm going to revisit and get to notice these things that on the first reading they escape me. But going back through and it's like, wow, that holds up to a second, a third, a fourth reading.
And to a mark out there, when we say detail, we're talking about story components. We're not talking about crosshatch.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, it's text, it's writing, it's attention to characters, and having all these characters have their own arcs, even if they're, fourth, fifth, sixth lead characters that we don't see a lot, but when we see them, they're very consistent, and things are resolved, and they have their own sense of agency moving through the story, maybe moving through subplots and backgrounds, but they're there, they're considered, they're not left alone, they're not dangling threads at the end. It's all sort of what he introduces and what he sets up, he answers, he completes. And it's remarkable for I think a story like this, and I think it speaks to that 16-panel grid as being something that maybe allows for that type of meticulous planning.
And it's all storytelling. Like the art is just in service of the storytelling. Some of it I think would fall apart if it wasn't for Lynn Varley kind of keeping everything together, because if you see this stuff, I don't know that the average like Wednesday Warrior would be able to put up with a comic that looked like this in terms of like the line work. They would say that, it's dashed off, it's hacked. And there are scenes like when Harvey Dent gets, he's got the bandages on his face, goes to meet his guys, and there are panels where the playing cards are bigger than the dollar bills on the table or something like that, and it's inconsistent. It totally doesn't matter.
You're reading it. And Miller called it cartooning. That's the word he used to describe the style of this. It's about communication.
He does some really interesting things stylistically, and he's been, he's explored style, right? Like Ronin, we mentioned, is a precursor to this, where he's bringing in manga Japanese influences and European influences like Mobius, and it's very clear those are the influences in this book. We don't see that here. Instead, I think a lot of the influences are coming from some of his contemporary collaborators at the time, Mazzucchelli, who he's working with probably in the beginning on Daredevil Reborn, and then eventually Batman Year One, and Bill Sienkiewicz, Daredevil graphic novel, the Kingpin graphic novel, Elektra Assassin ultimately, and I think he's bringing in some of their ideas on line work. And it's a huge contrast with Klaus Janson, who is this like super perfect finisher, and somebody that he collaborates with on Daredevil up until the end, whenever then he switches, different inker for his final last issue. And there are, well-known public stories about clashes with Klaus Janson in this book. And I see those more contemporary influences on him. Bill Sienkiewicz is a guy in New York that's probably drawing from certainly contemporary illustration and possibly the art world at the time. Mazzucchelli has talked extensively about his use of the dead line, removing the kind of sexy, sensual line that we associate with brush inkers, that polish. And I think you see that in this book, and you see Miller sort of entertaining that, where the line doesn't have the value or the polish that it has in a lot of superhero comics. And I think it comes from those two guys and working with those two guys and probably talking about what they're doing and why they're doing it and where they're coming from.
When you see like the things that Miller has inked, like throughout his career leading to this, he's like very uncomfortable with his approach to inking, and like every time he's like, maybe this will do it, maybe this will do it, and then Ronin was like, okay, maybe a million little slashy lines is the, and no, you know, and then it isn't until this like long journey to like Sin City where it's like, okay, he finally finds a way of finishing, of inking his work that is appropriate, that does satisfy. But it's really interesting to see that journey, and it is a lot of flailing and thrashing about, but you end up doing very different things.
You see it in the promotional stuff that's been released around Dark Knight. There are all these drawings where it's like, it's not a rapidograph, but it's a line that's kind of just this like scratchy line and then like some dark big blobs of ink. I think it's a contemporary illustration technique at this time, as opposed to the comic book style. And I think it's just a guy who's, you know, he's always pushing visually.
And some of the visuals, early on he would bring in film influences, and then as he became more comfortable with the comic book page, he did his best to like work against the kind of filmic approach. But this is maybe close to the height of like the filmic part of his career, and you could see like, you know, German expressionism is associated with him quite often, and you see that a lot in this story where he's just making choices. Like if you watch the Dark Knight like cartoon, they have to root a lot of what the backgrounds and stuff like in like a real world setting, but through the magic of comics, he can just show Bruce Wayne at the top of like a weird staircase that you don't see like where it is, and you just see a bunch of things that have rags and tarps over top of them, and like there it is, man. That's your Batcave.
Yeah. Yeah, when he talked to Eisner, they were talking about stage, where it's like the whole scene is just it's a lamppost, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and there are some great panels that speak to that. You know, when he's sitting around before he comes out of retirement, and we see like the shadow as the bat's like approaching the mansion, and we see like the X shadow on his head, you know, the mark on his forehead. The flashbacks to his parents being killed, where there are several panels of like, you know, the hand. And it's just framed as like this icon, you know. You could read it from a mile away. It's super simple, but been copied ever since, you know. And those feel like that kind of composition that you're talking about, where it's just visually so iconic, but definitely you can see film reference in these moments.
There's that shot where he's talking to Commissioner Gordon, and you have the Gotham like tower in the background, and it looks almost like the tower is curving up, like curvilinear perspective, or curving down, and like I mean, I don't know if you guys have any insight on it, but like I'm fascinated by that and like what he's pulling from. And,
a lot of money shots, like and that is one. And I'm glad you brought up that page, because there is like an amazing like little technical snafu on that page. If you look closely, Lynn Varley, she colored this blue line method. So Klaus would ink the page, they would hand it off to photo bureau, whoever. They would turn that black and white line art into a blue line piece of artboard that would be passed to Lynn Varley, and then she would be tasked with coloring it. So if you take a look at that panel and take a look at the word balloons, there's a little blue tail that wasn't inked there, and the tail was moved over. And I'll be honest with you, when I was a little dude, I was so curious about what that was.
Yeah, I've never noticed that. That's...
Talking about snafus, the Two-Face's dollar coin, that half of it's the dollar coin is defaced, is actually a 50-cent piece with Kennedy on it. And because like the thing of like, I feel like the thing of like Kennedy's face being defaced is kind of like an important thing. Like just for like Miller's baby boomer generation, it is this like turning point of like where things got ugly in America was like after Kennedy was shot, and that Harvey Dent almost as this sort of like Kennedy kind of this like handsome like young guy who's gonna like, you know, lead us into some nice new era, and then you know gets you know, and now we're in this like, you know, world of darkness or whatever. But I thought that was an interesting, like it would have been Susan B. Anthony if it were a dollar, but maybe for Miller that didn't fit as well, or he's just on autopilot. Yeah.
Some little fun formal experimentation where it doesn't take away from the story whatsoever, man. But when we are introduced with Harvey Dent he bifurcates the panel.
Yeah.
It'll be really one image, but it's bifurcated down the middle several times of his face. So it'll turn that 16 panel grid into 32 panel thing.
Made me think of Bernie Krigstein.
Krigstein,
Yeah.
Who I'm sure Miller's familiar with and drawing.
Yeah,
some
there's a lot of like
influence
EC stuff that comes in, like a lot of like motifs and things that happen are like very EC. Like even just like the scarred face and stuff is very like EC. And
I think
bandage.
the language and history that everybody's looking at the time is pretty concise.
Yeah,
like
it's common,
EC's
yeah.
a high point in comics history. That's something underground artists are looking at. I'm sure it's something that mainstream guys are conscious of and looking at. It's sort of a high point. You mentioned Frederick Wortham. It's another reference in a way to the EC comics, but those are something I think that cartoonists who had any interest in comics history are familiar with and looking at and drawing from.
Comics was a smaller world back then, certainly compared to now, where you have like this universe of things at your fingertips.
And of course, Miller being a crime fan, I'm sure that helped as well. Two-Face, is the main villain in this first book. I was very satisfied rereading this with how well those books are broken down.
Yes.
Like, it's very satisfying, any of these individual books as a chapter, as a standalone short story. And I thought Two-Face is an interesting opening character. And my note on that is, it's black or white. It's an ideology that fits Batman very well and works well to kind of establish that black or white kind of simplistic worldview in the beginning.
It's also a thing to me. It's almost like that thematic mirroring thing where
Yeah.
it's like Bruce Wayne is back in effect. He's Batman now, so we're going to take Harvey Dent and dirty him up.
Yes, and they reveal it's no longer Two-Face. Harvey Dent's all Two-Face. It's not half and half anymore. And the same reveal is it's not Bruce Wayne. It's Batman. It's always been Batman. It's consumed him. He's this monster.
And that last page of issue 1. You see future Frank Miller in there. It's a Sin City panel when he's kind of like holding on to him. It's pure black and white.
Yeah.
I guess thunder cracks or something like that. Like Lynn Varley decided no color on that page, man, and it's stark black and white. I take a look at the page we have here with Harvey Dent too, where it's like on screen it looks very Sin City-ish.
Yeah, totally Sin City in black and white. Yeah, towards the end of the book, the Dent's crew is flying off and the helicopter explodes. And the caption is, leaving the world no poorer, 4 men die. And I have a note of nihilism. It's just, it's such a dark statement about humanity, and it feels like reading more of Miller's work. That's Miller talking there, you know? It's
yeah. Like,
very critical.
I was very young in the 80s, and I've always known the name Bernie Getz. But I never looked that deep into him. So, like, do people look at him as a good guy? Like, is he a dividing line? Like, some people think he's great for what he did. Some people think he's bad because, like, I just don't quite know.
Yeah, at the time, because just living and being like a little older.
Yeah.
Like at the time Miller's making this, or closer to when Bernie Getz was a thing, it was a lot more of like a dividing thing, like where some people, yeah, he's a piece of crap, but some people are like, no, this is what we need. This is a hero, and over time, we've gotten a clearer look at Bernie Getz, and it's kind of like it would be embarrassing to think that you might have been, because it's kind of like now that the understanding of Bernard Getz was that it was, and this comes up in like these right to carry stuff nowadays, where it's like there are some people who are walking around with a gun, just waiting for somebody to give them the tiniest excuse to blow them away. And this is a very bad thing for our society, and we can, we can't have this, and we're seeing it play out. We've seen it play out recent. That's sort of the verdict on Getz now. But back then it was like, and of course now you'll probably find a lot of people who would say, oh no, this right to carry. Of course, these times we live in. But yeah, at the time, Bernie Getz, it was kind of like, well, maybe Bernie Getz and maybe the Guardian Angels, maybe this is what we need. Things are real bleak in New York right now. Maybe this, and I don't think it's aged well as a worldview.
Everything you just described are issues and things that will be covered in future issues of Dark Knight Returns, man. So I'm glad you went there, man.
I have a note on the taxi scene. It's a pimp comes into a taxi, pays the taxi driver to basically mind his own business. I feel like that's a little bit of a jab at capitalism, a little critique of capitalism, because Batman reaches in, pulls out the money, and like shreds it in front of him. There's these little bits of politics sprinkled throughout, and we'll probably come back to this in future books. And it's interesting because it's not as clear-cut. I think Miller's politics have become front and center with him, publicly. But I think at this time it's not necessarily who he is, or it's not as clear, because he ends up criticizing lots of people, lots of ideologies throughout this book. But that's kind of stood out to me a little bit.
You know what, that scene made me think of, like, and this was in Watchmen too, but like the Kitty Genovese, like, laissez-faire attitude of, like, okay, there's somebody getting stabbed right there, but I'm just going to mind my own, man. Which was a very New York thing. Like, watch any Ninja Turtles movie or something like that,
Sure.
and you see a lot of examples of that.
Like, mugging is the ritual of Batman. Like, just the Batman mythology. It happens again and again. It's like every Batman comic probably has like multiple muggings, and then like he shows up and thwarts it or whatever. This is a mythic Batman. The Miller Batman. And what's myth? It's cyclical. It repeats
A
again.
game of telephone.
Yeah, and we're seeing the myth repeated again. This could be Batman issue 1 of Batman, because it's got all the beats, and it's an origin story, and it ends with with the bat flying through. The bat flies through the window and becomes Batman. This thing is repeated, and that ritual, the mugging ritual, is the ritual that started like with his genesis, with his parents, and so we're just gonna and like that was something that occurred to me on this reading, is that we're just gonna see this thing played out, and it's like just throughout the entire series, just see that scenario. Like to me, as like a fan of comics and stuff, when you read it's kind of played out. Like, I'm kind of sick of seeing Batman thwart muggings, but here you're sort of seeing like it serves a purpose.
Speaking of muggings in this issue, when Carrie Kelly gets confronted by the mutants, he does throw a boy into the electric sign, probably kills him, right?
That's an interesting, because this is something people are talking about, because like Zack Snyder said, like, Batman murders, get over it, he kills. But if you look at this book from that point of view, does Batman murder? Throughout this, there's scenes where we're expected to assume that person's dead, and we certainly don't get any confirmation like, cough cough, or like, okay, they're okay. But throughout this story, future volumes, which we'll get to, they come to a point where, okay, Batman's crossed the line, he has murdered. So presumably everything we've seen, even that scene where like he shoots a guy with a gun, that these people get up and walk away from it. That guy who gets shot but from a storytelling point of view, you want, in that moment when you're reading this, to think, holy shit, Batman killed that kid, that electrocuted that kid. But Miller's keeping score. He's keeping score, but we're not. So I think that Batman does not commit any murder at all in the course of this series.
It's good to have that on the record, because things are going to come up in future issues.
There's a reference of Jason Todd. Gordon references Jason Todd whenever he's trying to kind of talk Bruce Wayne down from this whole return to Batman. And I had read this after Jason Todd was killed.
Me too.
Yeah.
But in real life, this book comes out 2 years before Jason Todd is killed, so we're going to get a couple Jason Todd references, and I wonder what the implication is there. Is that what drove Batman to retirement? And that's probably the one mystery that isn't really answered in this book, and it's strange because, again, if you read this in 1988, we've seen Jason Todd brutally
He's brand
murdered.
new. Yeah, like he's brand... Oh, in 88.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like later, like a couple years after this, we see his end, and Miller's referencing a terrible end, but who knows? Like
the sheep's flock, man. I think a lot of those 900 callers who chose that boy's fate were influenced by Dark Knight Returns.
How about this? I wonder if those 900 callers were bullshit, and DC did whatever they wanted to do with Jason Todd, and Jason Todd was always going to be killed, and they just cooked the numbers.
Denny O'Neil. We're going to ask you the tough questions next time we see you.
Whenever Gordon and Batman are talking about Harvey Dent and getting out and stuff, Batman expresses wanting to try to save Harvey Dent, wanting to try to keep him alive, and how hard that's going to be to do. And he does. He saves Harvey Dent. He doesn't care about the poor souls
Right.
that are killed in the helicopter explosion, but he does manage to save Harvey Dent, which is something he states as a difficult goal, but one that he has
Harvey
early
Dent
on.
is his mirror, and Harvey Dent is proof that there is hope, and that maybe he could conquer his... Like, if Harvey Dent can conquer his demons, maybe I can. If Harvey Dent can't conquer his demons, then I'm fucked. Because Harvey Dent is my reflection. Harvey Dent is Batman's reflection. The Joker is not Batman's reflection. He serves another purpose, but that's the purpose. All of these characters are in relation to Batman and how they function, which is why these characters, they each serve a very different function from each other. The one thing I wanted to get to,
Yes,
the origin. Okay, the mugging, the
32
murder,
page
32,
panel,
yeah,
32 panel
all this stuff. I mean, throughout this text, through the voice of Volper, Dr. Volper, and throughout various things, talk about Batman's problems are sexual. Batman's, Batman's terror is sexual terror. Batman, and that Batman's origin story is very sexual. The like a gun pointed at you, and then the pearls. Now, if studying the history of film, pearl necklaces, it goes back to that movie Ecstasy, that black and white movie, silent movie, where that's how they show somebody coming in that movie, like when they're fucking and then they come. That's how they show it. She's got this pearl necklace or bracelet or whatever, and then the necklace falls on the floor, and that's the cum shot. And this is sexual terror, Freudian terror, terror at the Oedipal.
I was going to say
thing.
that,
and seeing his mom with a gun, and then the pearl necklace, pearls everywhere, and Batman. So this is Miller's not blind to this. He's telling you pretty much, and so it's and Batman's sexual terror and his repression, which is what makes it into such a problem for him and makes him into this psychopath. It's sexual. So here we're seeing it laid out as clearly as you can have it laid out, and it's going to get referenced and returned to again and again in future volumes. So I just thought I had to put that on the record too, because it's going to come up later.
it's on there, on the record, on issue 1. Continuing our coverage, Dark Knight Returns, issue number 2. I have a confession to make, man. I read the first 2 issues far more than I read the complete book. When I was a kid, I was fully on board for these first 2. These are my sweet spots right here.
Okay, this isn't a confession, but this story blurs together in my head because I always read it as a collection.
Yeah.
So for preparing for this, I would read one of the books and then I'd make all my notes. And I was very impressed by how well these books stand on their own, and I love book 2.
Yeah.
The big book 2 enemy is that mutant leader, and I mean, that's perfect. That feels futuristic. Compared to fighting Harvey Dent, this is like a new threat. A threat that was not in the Batman comics I was used to reading.
I think about Miller as the old soul, and the kids that he is kind of commenting on. Miller is basically from the first generation of kids who didn't have to go into the workforce and skip high school or go to war. Before I guess he is draftable age or whatever for Vietnam or whatever.
He might have just skated under the line.
Oh, that's cool. He's living in a world where kids could just run around and be hooligans, and this comic is ramp that up, times 10.
Everything happens through a news media cycle of fear. So once gangs or drugs start to be distributed by street gangs, that becomes the thing, right? And in a weird way, it's the legacy of a movie like Warriors or something.
Yeah, the Warriors,
that first hears a whisper of this notion and then turns it into some pop culture trend, and eventually becomes news cycle. So, I think some of it is that. It's just looking around and being oh, what's the newest threat? What should we be afraid of? And it's always going to be young, something young.
Youth, yeah, whatever the youth are
The
doing.
new thing.
Yeah. This is the issue where you see all the stuff they stole for RoboCop.
Or that Miller poured it over.
yeah. I mean, I think they took it from him, and then it wasn't until RoboCop 2 that he handed things over, but...
Get a lot of good Carrie Kelly sequences here, and the color of the outfit juxtaposed with the grayness and the bleakness of everything else really shines.
I think
in this issue,
if you combine Miller's Batman with Miller's Robin and merge them together, you get Daredevil. A lot of the things that Batman's lacking that Daredevil has is personified in Carrie. The sort of flamboyance, the sense of fun, adventure.
I like this Robin a lot. And it starts, in book 1, Batman saves her. Before she has any inkling of Batman or Robin, he just saves her, and it has this impact, and then she starts to dress up as Robin and run around and have her little adventures. And then she repays the favor in this book, which is awesome. It sort of keeps them somewhat of a level. It's not Batman just saving her. At one point, she saves Batman's life in that mutant fight, the first round. So I thought that's kind of a nice way to really set Robin up and to elevate her character.
And existentially, Robin, Carrie, saves Batman in the most important way. She kind of saves her soul. That it would just be this bleak descent into darkness without this hopeful character, like thematically.
I'm going to try to keep that in mind when she witnesses a bunch of dead Boy Scouts later on.
A detail with Carrie, like with her like beginnings as Robin, I really like the text in this thing, like how the text is so visual and evocative and tells a story like parallel to like the pictures that and doesn't just reiterate. And when she's talking about climbing like outside the building and how it's feeling like the underside of a car, like that's such a great detail, and it really changes like the whole thing of superheroes where there are all these guys climbing up walls and bouncing off rooftops, and it is like, oh yeah, it's probably real gross up there. Like it just makes it more like brings some more senses.
It's a great picture of Gotham as character, right? As like this dirty city,
gritty. Like what.
Yeah. Early on, Commissioner Gordon kills a miner.
Yes.
So like you think of Kelly as one version of these young characters, and here's the other side of Gordon killing one. And it is not, there's not a lot of attention given to it. There's one panel of a television screen asking him about a reaction that he just kind of, looks away or whatever. They don't dwell on this. Like this was one of those strange moments that it feels like you could write a book around this moment, right? The police commissioner shoots and kills a miner. Nothing. Business as usual. A 16th of a page later.
It gives Miller a chance to like screw with the media a little bit of fake news, where it's the Lola, who basically might as well be a copyrightless character because she pops up all over the place, man. Marvel Comics, Image Comics. I may or may not have drawn her in my latest X-Men comic. And she gets on the mic. Commissioner Gordon killed. Oh wait, I read that wrong. Commissioner Gordon kills a 17-year-old.
Lola has that Gumby haircut, and like I don't know if you guys have, but like I had a teacher who had that Gumby haircut, and I used to like draw her like, with Miss Gumsmith. I called her.
We had kids who had the high top fade Gumby, and in my school yearbooks, I would black in with a Sharpie and finish the fade.
One note I have that. Batman terrorizes the economically disadvantaged and socially maligned. Dylan Horrocks has said in interviews that when he wrote for Batman, he was very troubled by the worldview that's just implied in the universe of Batman. And this is where it's like all the cards are put on the table is in this work.
I think that's a reasonable criticism. I'm surprised that doesn't come up more often because, like, where is Batman operating? Like, anytime you see these neighborhoods where he's at, I think there are class issues that go unaddressed when it comes to Batman.
I mean, he's a giant billionaire going into, destitute-ass neighborhoods. I mean, they will use Crime Alley. Crime Alley becomes Hamsterdam from The Wire, where it's just like everybody just lets them go off and, like, have battles, and it's like, well, there are people who live there, you know what I mean? And some spines do get broken. But, Batman has no problem with it because they're young enough, they'll walk again.
Maybe. Probably. He rescues the kidnapped baby. And we talked last episode about, he definitely shoots one of the mutant gang there. Maybe doesn't kill him, but I mean, it's a large gun that he uses to shoot that character. So I read that as he must kill this guy. It's an M60. I've seen First Blood Part 2.
Every reading except this reading, I thought for sure he killed that guy. But, we're doing something different here. We're reading, and just as a creator, this is a trick. I've seen other creators do it, and I learned it, and I do it myself, where you have a scene, and you let the reader assume certain things. You have a scene where it's like, bam, that guy's definitely dead, and I don't confirm or deny, and so you go around thinking this guy's dead, and then a couple issues later, he's back. And I don't say like, oh, when you shut, it's just, he's back. And then the reader's like, oh, I guess that thing didn't kill. And I think that's because the headline does not come up yet where Batman kills. We're in a different world now. We have a warrant for Batman's arrest on murder. That doesn't happen till later, a later volume. So it doesn't happen here. So yes, it looks like he kills him. That's a great way to play out a scene. Is to make you think Batman killed a guy, but that guy's okay.
So the teenage boy who got thrown up into the lights, he's cool.
Yeah.
The kid who got shot with 50 caliber round, totally cool. Yes. And frankly, it's the truth because when we get to Joker, like, there's
that becomes an issue there too.
We'll get there.
Yeah, for Miller, at least in this work, an important a thing you cannot excise from the Batman mythology is that Batman does not kill.
So many memorable sequences in this damn comic. Can we talk about when he elicits not necessarily a confession, but some information from one of the people, one of the kidnappers or whatever that he gets his hands on? Black panels, and then we slowly see, a cityscape from a bird's eye view, as they call it. Turn the page.
I love the black panel reveal because it's his fingers. Eventually, it's like the fingers are opening in front of his eyes, but they're just black bar. It's black silhouettes. So I think that's a really cool.
And there will be a callback in a matter of speaking whenever the mutant leader is going to escape through the sewage tunnel, and then he sees the end of that. But we got the guy hanging from the gargoyle, looking down, and Batman gets some info that it's been a general, a 4-star general has been leaking these firearms.
Yeah, military grade stuff. I like this subplot. It reminds me of Brought to Light, which is a couple years later. Yeah. It's Alan Moore's Eclipse expose of CIA, some of the CIA's dirty history. But it also reminds me of things like Ollie North.
Yeah, the Nicaraguan Contras and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Freeway Mickey Ross, selling crack to fund.
And how connected all of this stuff is and how corrupt all of this stuff is. And there is a little bit more politics in this issue because we see the mayor in this issue a couple of times.
Passing the buck a lot.
Yeah. And really shown to be ineffective. Yeah. But we also see the president in this issue. So we're starting to see Miller taking aim at some of these political figures and critical of everybody. Yeah. None of these characters are shown in a good light, including the military-industrial complex.
Which I think, as a cartoonist or as a creator, you need to have that outsider's view. You need to kind of, look at everything. Talking about political, it's, political in every sense. It's not just political in that it's overtly talking about political figures and political ideology. We're starting to see in this volume and onward that Miller is very aware of just, politics as a thing of how do groups function, group dynamics, take out the leader, and then humiliate the leader and watch the members scattered. He has a very, very clear idea of politics and how it works in every imaginable way.
He also, this is war.
Yeah.
And he brings in a military general, military weapons, talks about his whole plans with this mutant gang and crime. It's war, it's clearly war, and if there's any doubt, he's going to define it for you visually and through the text and make that very clear in this book. In this chapter, the book overall, but at this point it's when he establishes this is a war that Batman is waging.
Yeah, and we talk about sort of the propaganda aspects of Batman, and this is war, this is war on crime, and then living through this era, it's war on drugs comes a couple years after this, and we've seen the effects of this worldview. Talking about that general that subplot, I thought it was real interesting because you think of when Miller's writing this stuff out, he would write these things out as almost treatments, this sort of plot thing, and then he'd go in and take it page by page. And for that segment, I could imagine him Batman showing up in that guy's office, confronting him, "Hey, General, this and that," but that he chose to just make this great, iconic image, guy holding, draped in the flag, and then just in the text. I thought that was a really interesting choice, and might not have been his initial idea. He might have thought of approaching it more traditional, storytelling, the way he's approached, everything else. But when we talk about the influence of this work, that's a big part of the influence, is just creating these huge images as moments and as storytelling elements and letting that tell the story.
Miller is great at that. I think he does that in Sin City really effectively, where he's using just one image to advance a story, to be dramatic and effective and clear, and it is on display in Dark Knight time and time again. When he uses a full page image, he does so very, very well. The Dead General is one of those major storytelling. Usually it's to show Batman in a moment of glory and excitement and superhero homage. In this case, it really is a narrative exposition that he's doing in that one page. I get mad when athletes use war as a metaphor to describe whatever stupid...
Well, yeah, when anybody uses war as a metaphor to describe what they do if it's not war, if you're not a soldier.
A critical piece of the legacy of Dark Knight Returns for me is really changing the audience of comic books and superhero comics from intended for kids to intended for adults. And so, like, we see it with this war metaphor all through this book, and I don't know exactly how I feel because there's so many elements of this book that are silly and stupid and are childish. But then you mix in some of the stuff that's more serious, and it becomes harder to parse. And I think that we see this legacy in a lot of comics that I consider to be terrible and derivative because it is a mixed message. And most of these creators, they're not sure how to unpack it, and I'm not even sure about this book. You know, there's so many moments that they fall back to, it works as a kid's book with kind of an imaginary bend. You know, the idea of this hero's 10 years older, this is an end tale of a superhero. And the war metaphor really fits well in the messiness of, like, what is this? Who is the audience here? How are we supposed to read this? If I'm a Batman fan, 10-year-old that loves Batman, should I not be reading this book? Like, it's strange. It's a strange book.
You say that because I was 10 when this came out. And this cover right here, I saw this in the store. This was my first encounter with this work. Just seeing the cover, and I was scared of it. I'm like, this is not for me. It seemed pornographic. It seemed frightening. It seemed like a Fritz the Cat kind of thing or something where they took something that's very innocent and for children and made it into something dirty. And so that was my first impression. It was maybe like a year or two later or 3 later that I finally read, like somebody brought it to school. But that was so I got the message clearly that this was not for me. Comics aren't for kids anymore. Was the message.
Upon this latest rereading, I came out the other end just like thinking this is like a really well executed piece of pulp in the best sense of the word, like the best executed, most glorious sense of the word. But it's a superhero comic. Like, we cannot even take 2 seconds of our time to try to like explain how you can make Robin actually work or something like that. Because you just have to accept a lot of silliness like as you like move through the story.
And that's a lesson the people who imitated this work and were influenced by it, that's a lesson they didn't take away.
Said. Because
reading this, there is a lot of fun and silliness and adventure and wackiness, and they didn't take any of that. They just took the darkness, the brooding, the constipated look on the face. And I feel, and that's like the generation of cartoonists right before, or comic bookers right before us. We were after them, and we were. You talked about in the last episode, like reacting against this stuff, like as a creator. And for me, it was like that's what stuff like. As much as I loved it, there was a point where the imitators of this sent me running into the arms of Jack Kirby. I wanted something joyful and fun and that blows your imagination up in a good way. Fear, negative emotions are very easy to conjure. And it's why in like exploitation media and things, you do go there because you can get people really excited in a negative thing. Getting something excited about something that's not Plutonian, not of the depths and dark, something that's Apollonian, like Superman or whatever, something that's Apollonian is so much harder. But the effect when you pull it off it energizes you as opposed to like stuff that takes energy away.
Our next scene coming up is the showdown with the mutant leader, the first meeting with the mutant leader, and it's Batman arriving in his Batmobile. That is a tank. Like, it's a full-on redesign of the Batmobile, and it's very iconic. Like it's something that we saw in Bruce Timm's Batman cartoon. It's something that I think we've seen in some of the Christopher Nolan movies. That cockpit Batman moment is something I think Miller really creates here. It stands out.
Can we just like lead into that by just saying that mayor who can't make a decision, he's always deferring responsibility and stuff, and he's talking like in the sauna with his consigliere, and they're just like doing those kind of like things where it's like, well, we should get a black guy to be the commissioner, all that stuff. The only time he can make a definitive decision is by blaming Commissioner Gordon for the mutants even like being in existence. So I wanted to lay that out because that's going to come home to roost after.
Yeah, passing the buck.
Right, yeah. We'll come back to that mayor.
Yeah.
That tank, like I'm seeing, Kirby's influence sprinkled through. Miller is a huge admirer of Kirby. And previous issue, let's motivate. That's a word Kirby invented in Jimmy Olsen. That's what Jimmy Olsen tells his motorcycle gang. Motivate. That Batman tank, I'm seeing Jack Kirby's Mountain of Judgment. It was this like massive tank with like a monster mounted on it, like this monster face. So I'm seeing that as like a Kirby-esque flourish. That Batman has a mountain of judgment, this like giant monstrous tank. That's the only like precedent I could think of for a vehicle like that, and it just kind of fits.
I think there's a World War II reference. You know, that whole scene, like when they go into the dump and he's blowing stuff up, and it's again gray.
It is like it's the Blitz, and when
in mud.
And it's a tank. Batman needs a Batmobile. This is his Batmobile. We're talking about war. It's a war on crime. The Batmobile's a tank now.
I want to take a minute at this point, though. The reason I brought that piece up is Miller's design on this book, I think, is exceptional.
Yeah.
He basically redesigns Batman. You know, he rebuilds his body. The costume is the little ears, which are pretty, you know, when you think of like these iconic versions of Batman, it's usually with the big
the long ears were. Yeah.
It's a very different version of Batman that Miller sort of builds throughout this story. And I don't know if it gets enough credit. You know, like after the story, there's lots of reference to that stuff. Yeah. But there are several of these things that he designs or redesigns for this story and for the Batman mythology that then becomes almost canon.
Yeah. Previous readings, I assigned story points to that. It's like, okay, that his costume gets ripped up in issue 1. So now in issue 2, he's wearing his older costume. That must have been like in mothballs or whatever. But like just reading it from my perspective now, it is like, this is an evolving work that Miller's working on, and he's entering a fugue state. And the fugue state really takes off, I think, in the next 2 issues. But where he's and he's just like, I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna like you see the engines coming on, and that is like he reinvents Batman's look. I'd say a couple of times in each issue.
Yeah, I think it's noteworthy. You know, there's so much that gets celebrated and talked about and discussed with Dark Knight Returns. That's not always one that gets the credit I think it deserves. You know, I think Miller is visually very inventive, and it's on display in this book, and it doesn't look like DC, it doesn't look like Batman, you know, like this is a unique visual experience compared to what they were publishing, and, you know, what their house style would have been. This is completely revolutionary, and I don't want to lose that. You know, like that was the stuff that initially attracted me to Frank Miller, so I think it's worth calling attention to, and that Batmobile, you know, just stands out. Like I've seen it so many times post this.
There's the cover to this, and that's the big blocky Batman, right, mm-hmm. for issue 2. When he emerges from that tank, there's that iconic splash page that wouldn't work. Like, it's an awkward pose. It's boxy, it's weird, it's like the contrapposto is off.
It feels Kirby-esque to me.
Yeah.
Like this big, bulky Hulk kind of body going in like, ready
it definitely feels like that's Kirby. Kirby is an element that he brings to this version of Batman that I don't remember seeing in anybody else's version of Batman.
Yeah, there's like Kirby all through the like of course I see everything through a Kirby lens, but like there's like a point early on in the story where Batman's standing on these 2 posts and his legs are spread, like standing on these 2 posts, and it's like the Eternals, that like big red god standing on the 2 pylons and stuff. Like I mean there's so many influences coming into this, and you know, Kirby's just part of a soup.
So he shows up, he gets all this mutant gang threat together, shows up, you know, takes out most of them, fights the leader, but the mutant gang is the big threat, this issue. That feels very forward. You know, it's not like Batman's traditional rogues gallery that we do see bookending this story. And I wonder, like, clearly it's a reference to X-Men, right? Or to Marvel or something. Do you take...
Yeah, they got the Cyclops visors,
yeah.
which took me years and years to get. You know, okay, that's Cyclops. You know, the mutants, I get it. They're the X-Men.
It feels like that's not a thing that's made, you know, nobody talks about that part, but I mean, you know, what's he saying here? What's he
well, he keeps talking about like they're like Joe, I don't think he names Joe Chill, but he says like these are his children, the guy who killed my parents, these are his children, these are a purer breed. This, you know, so that it is mutants, it is like an you know, evolution of society, and the kids are just like a totally different thing than we are. This book, everything in this book is screamed at a fever pitch. So this is Miller looking at the world, and so he's coming at it with like, you know, what's going on, you know, in every aspect.
I think it's a function of, you see this in late period Chester Gould, where I'm saying he was spending 50 years inside of his like office making comics. I know for myself that like I almost struggle when I pay the rent check to like not put like 2005 on the damn thing, man. So there's this like time distortion field, and then you go out there and then you see, you know, like kids drinking codeine cough syrup and Sprite, like in their little bottles, walking down the street, acting like crazy. And then new drugs, like this is the PCP era, and now we have Flocka with like people like holding on to like fences and like looking like they're electrocuted and shit. Like, so
it's easy to assign, and I go there too, like assigning biographical reasons to the choices made. That the things that happen in this comic tell us something about Frank Miller. But I think that does a little bit of a disservice to him, because I think he is approaching this as, I'm telling the story of Batman. I'm getting into Batman's world. I'm getting into Batman's head. That this is Batman. Like what you're seeing is Batman's view of things. This is Batman's world, a world where Batman makes sense. And I would have loved. The next thing he was going to work on was retooling Superman with Steve Gerber, and I would have loved to have seen his approach to Superman as Superman's book, because Superman is in here, but it's Batman's view of Superman. Mm-hmm. And I would love to, like talking about Plutonian and Apollonian, I'd love to see like what Miller at this time, what he is going to make a Superman book soon, but what at this time he would have made of Superman, because I feel like it would have been a different work. It would have been more sunlight and brightness. It would have been, that how much of this is Miller and how much of this is Miller being Batman.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we do see a little bit of the color with the treatment of Superman in this book, and it is a rainbow compared to the Batman color palette. I wonder if you could read this as almost Miller's history of the superhero genre, in which case the mutants really are X-Men and they really are Marvel as like the young upstarts. And especially when you think of if you were going to represent Marvel at this time in your Miller's age, a lot of
X-Men
conjecture.
was the sales force.
Yes, exactly. That would have been the book that in the 70s sort of like appears. And the X-Men are essentially terrorists, right? They're sort of, the way they operate, they could almost be viewed that way and oppositional to the establishment. And in a weird way, like if you read those characters as X-Men, it does become this like history of comics. Superman is represented at this time period. We see Wonder Woman's costume show up because she has been marginalized with comic book readers at this point. She still exists, but it is not a sales juggernaut. She's not a successful comic book seller at this moment in comics history. Compared to some of these other compared to Superman, Batman, and X-Men.
In the 80s, there is a lot of like this is like the baby boomers. And they grew up on like they grew up on Batman and things like that, and Superman. And it's like, it's a lot of like whatever happened to the Lone Ranger, whatever. And we're seeing this in cinema. The Lone Ranger movie comes back. There's a movie I think you guys should check out that I think was maybe influential in this. It's Robin and Marion. It's the story of Robin Hood, but it's old man Robin Hood, and he's played by Sean Connery. And I feel like that is like a really good parallel with this, where it's like this thing we learned about as a child, and he's real like flamboyant and adventurous. Now we're seeing him at the end of his journey, where things are ugly and bitter, and the fights aren't fun and enjoyable. They're kind of brutal, and like we're just getting down to and it's the cold art of the butcher, as Jack Kirby calls it, and this book's coming out of that larger context of re-examining the heroes, we as young people, and like the generation before us, the baby boomers, grew up with. After
the first mutant fight, the city's going to shambles, and it gives Miller that chance, because the Batman is back, and Batman is in the hearts and minds of the city, and we're seeing how that plays out a bunch, man. We have Arnold Crimp, the guy going to the porno theater with seeing Satan's nuns or whatever that thing.
That was a big part of Death Wish too, like Death Wish 1, but in Death Wish also was the effect that Charles Bronson was having on the rest of the city, and a lot of it told through like TV screens.
It's so disturbing, that scene now in hindsight, with like after the Denver theater shooting at a Batman movie. It's like
there are so many examples. I'm saying there's 9/11 allusions. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
sort of.
It's weird how that works, because there are a lot of other works too that have these weird references that time passes and then you look at these works differently because of the way events kind of change their meaning in the context that we view them through, and there are those moments here. But I think the imitation thing is interesting because that happens all over the place.
Yeah.
That guy in the theater, like his dialogue, it was interesting. It jumped out to me of like numerology, because he's just constantly talking about numbers. There were 7 of these, and so like just like this like looking for patterns in
little reference to Satanism throughout that scene, and the satanic scare of the
yeah,
80s,
satanic
I
scare.
think,
Yeah,
is
and we
present.
lived through it, and it's like you remember like, oh yeah, don't buy that record because if you play backward,
Right.
Satan's going to show up, and
Stairway to Heaven.
yeah.
Yeah, Judas Priest.
Well, of course, you play Stairway to Heaven backwards, you're going to get hell. It stands to
But going
reason.
down the
Yeah.
stairs.
Yeah, you're going down the stairs to hell. Yeah.
After he gets rocked by the mutant leader and Carrie Kelly saves him, we do have that splash page with disrobed, fully nude Bruce Wayne like embracing the girl.
Yes, and does not have to be nude there. You know what I mean? It'd be very easy to have some shorts on him, to have pants on him, to have anything on him. It's clear that he's naked.
It's weird.
It is weird.
I mean that's one of the things that people would say about this work is that Miller made Robin a girl so that he'd be okay with the very obvious and like that everybody agrees on that Batman and Robin are fucking like the Wortham thing, and that this is a way that for Miller to make it at least heteronormative or whatever, and of course that would be an unfair criticism, unfair thing to say, but in the sequel to this work, Carrie Kelly and Batman do become a couple, by the end of it, so it's it's playing out in the story. You're like the reason it freaks you out is because it is a freaky moment. It's
Yeah, it's hard to excuse that one, especially because again, it's a big page. Like we've talked about the way he uses full page splashes. That thing is front center, large.
Miller's a provocateur, and that's a very provocative image.
Yes,
and it's the '80s. It's Mapplethorpe era. It's
Who's that?
Maple, the photographer who would make like these photographs of like nude adults and children, or what New York New York artists. This is the New York of the '80s that this book is representing. The New York of the '70s and the '80s. So it's like part of that.
We have Corto Maltese
Yeah,
introduced.
yeah. Like what would be an '80s story if we didn't have some way to like deal with Cold War issues?
Yes.
Yeah, Cold War, and then Central
Combined
American,
with like,
South American.
Miller putting
yeah.
his influence there on his sleeve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hugo Pratt,
Very, very
Yeah,
interesting.
Hugo Pratt, yeah.
Clearly a guy who has influenced his artwork.
definitely.
And then he introduces this location that goes on to be part of the DC universe.
Oh, does it really?
Yeah,
That's funny.
Yeah, and to me, it was kind of like, okay, what is this Corto Maltese? But it does pop up in other stuff. Just getting back to that era, just remembering it, like so many things, like Watchmen has this too, where like of course there's an inevitable nuclear conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Of course, like that it was inescapable. And living at that time, I felt that way too.
I wanted to ask you guys about that. Like, did you feel that energy? Because I was so young
too.
that like Ninja Turtles were out.
I used to
and I didn't
have
care.
nuclear war nightmares when I was 5 and 6.
Yeah, like I
That's
thought it was
sort of what I
really.
was looking for.
And whenever you'd watch like Mad Max or something, it's like, okay, yeah, this when I grow up, this is what the world's going to be.
Yeah.
like the nuclear, like, and it's gotta and because it was just everywhere in the media. It was like war games, like everything was
Red
about
Dawn.
nuclear annihilation, and that it was
Yeah.
inevitable. And so you just got to figure out how am I going to survive an irradiated wasteland. But yeah, it was very real.
Sticking with the war subject matter, we have a scene where Gordon attempts to explain Batman to the new commissioner that's coming in, Yandel, and compares him to tells a story about Pearl Harbor and whether Franklin Roosevelt knew about Pearl Harbor and allowed it to happen in order to energize the American people for war. And he said, I guess he's a veteran in this story.
Yeah,
So-
but-
Yeah, in year one, he is like, and year one in this,
yeah,
are very connected.
like he's very passionate about this subject, and he says, he thought about it, and it's just too big for him to understand whether it was true or not. Like what it led to, the end results. No, he doesn't want to change at all. So if he knew about it and allowed it to happen, but it it affected the results that he's happy with. How do you process that? And he equates that to Batman, and it's interesting because as the story goes on, we see a moment where Yandel has that.
Right.
Yeah,
She's
yeah,
exposed
she-
to
yeah.
this.
And she said he's too big.
The cycle of myth. She's going through the same journey that Gordon went through. Gordon started out chasing Batman with the cops, and then eventually understood and became his ally.
Gordon retires, and we get to. There's so many inner monologues. Everybody gets a voice in this, and it's the same thing that it opens with. Whenever he shoots that underage kid, You know, he says his secret is he thinks of Sarah and it's easy. And it's the same deal when he retires. And it's just so incredible to me that there's just no attention given to that beyond a Frank Miller caption. You know, something that he gets to neatly tie in through fiction as the opening and closing of this book. But meanwhile, it's like some kid's life, and there's nothing. There's no psychological ramifications. There's no media outcry. There's no legal anything. And he ends with this emotional moment again that goes back to his wife, and it's his whole career and life, and summed up in this one moment.
This is like hysteria, and this is like demonization of. Like all the things you're afraid of. So you're afraid of gang violence. So like you like he refers to the kids in this gang as monsters. Like he dehumanizes them, and we sort of see that, you know, played out in real life too. Like and as adults and seeing it played out in real life, like what the effects are when you dehumanize some segment of the population, and then that dehumanization starts to spread outward, and how so it's. But back then, I think maybe it was just like it was like a newer idea, and it was, you know, thought of as maybe like a possible solution to an intractable problem, but it's like, as long as it stays within this fiction, it's okay. But if it you know, in the real world, that's really awful, you know.
Yeah, and it's one of those incidents we see.
Yeah, it's too much a part of our life.
Quite a lot in media these days, or I guess in real life.
You know,
it's amplified through media, or hard to ignore. You know, the way it's ignored here. I wonder about how much we are scrutinizing like every word of this book. You know, as Miller's doing redrawings and he's trying to put together this thing that comics really haven't seen before up to this point, it's possible some of this stuff is not something he's considering and reconsidering, and you know, like it works well, and it's amazing how it seems like all the details fit together, but maybe they don't. You know, maybe it's almost luck, or it's almost a formality, and he's not giving that much thought to, you know, fourth, fifth character, even though they get a little bit of an arc. It may not be the thing that he's writing and rewriting and thinking about.
I don't think he came into this saying, I have things I want to say about society. I have a very clear idea, and I'm going to say it now. He's in there sort of reacting. He's just sort of looking around and seeing what he reacts. There isn't, like, he has some plans, but the story the story that this work tells is not the exact same thing as Frank Miller, the human being, and what he might tell you sitting, like those are two, and like that's something I've like learned about as a creator, that like your creative self is almost like this other being and has its own agenda, and the top agenda is to create something that is not boring. That's the capital sin in creation. In creation is to be boring. In your real life, that is not the worst. The worst thing you can do is hurt people. You know, but.
My last note on book 2 is, as we wrap up, we get to see the fallout of defeating the mutant leader.
Instantaneously.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's also a panel of Matt Murdock is there.
Yeah, Matt Murdock's there,
the mutant leader, so a little cameo.
Yeah, Turk made a cameo. They mentioned Turk in the previous issue, so Miller's got his like little gang of players.
You talk about humor, Tom, you know, and how there's all this stuff that Miller's doing that a lot of the imitators don't pick up on. I think that's an example.
The fight where he defeats the mutant leader, we're seeing Batman's like just pure ego, and the fact that like he has to see if he could beat this guy by hand, and before that it's like Harvey Dent, and he's like, I have to like put myself in peril to like save this guy because I have to know. There's all this ego, hubris stuff wrapped up in there, but then when the ultimate defeat does occur, where he pulps the mutant leader, we do see that the bifurcation of the gangs immediately. The Sons of Batman are here, and they are like a good analog for like a guardian angel. They're like the born again Christian, or like the newly the person who just recently stopped smoking, and like they're like way on this side, completely the opposite direction. They're fucking righteous like zealots for the law.
The final page of this book. The title of this chapter is The Dark Knight Triumphant, and the final page is him. I hear the sound of a wolf baying, and I know exactly how he feels. And he's like, I'm top dog. Yeah. I just like conquered my prey or my enemy or whatever, and I'm woo. You know, so he's at this moment in time, he's enjoying being Batman, which is maybe the first time in this story, and maybe the last time in this story.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to see if that lasts, man. Dark Knight Chapter 3.
Hunt the Dark Knight.
It starts off with a bang. When in any Kurt Swan Superman comic did you get to see the first person view, like through the clouds, like coming down at the city?
View,
amazing. And then that iconic, crusty old fat lady, drunk. Miller and Moore and like Neil Gaiman, like they all have this character, it's like mad heady kind of character that kind of like shows up.
I was wondering like if this, because like Paul Verhoeven stole so much of this for RoboCop. I wonder if he stole when Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up in the airport dressed as like an old fat lady, and then he takes the head off. And like I wonder if he grabbed that from this.
This is such a bizarre opening too.
Yes,
it's
very
like,
bizarre.
is Bruce Wayne like undercover here, waiting for this liquor store to be knocked off or whatever?
And he's like, not only is he a superhero, not only is he like a billionaire playboy, but now he's like an amazing like impressionist,
Master of Disguise, which I think is like that was in the Neil Adams thing. He would play Matches Malone, like so he would take on other like alter ego personas, you know, to go undercover in these sting operations.
It's come out fairly recently on McFarlane's blog that he helped ink some backgrounds and stuff on Dark Knight Returns, man. And he cited the pages that he worked on, right? He said, yeah, the sequence with the fat drunk lady, I got to draw a bunch of like explosion lines and bricks coming out of the wall and like stuff like that because he was friends with Klaus Jansson's inking assistant. And we live in an amazing era. The artist edition is out. It's before us on the table. And it's one of the sequences, like very early on, where we see the blue blur of Superman, and the wall kind of explodes. When you take a look at the original art, all of those explosion lines are whited out.
Like this, that story, like it's almost too good to be true because like the subject matter of these first couple pages is so McFarlane. Like you could always, like if you're making McFarlane's life story, you could always be like, okay, there's like a homeless woman. Okay, I'm gonna put her. You know, I'm gonna people with swastikas on. You know, like it's just like so on brand for McFarlane.
Frank Miller and his swastikas, like in all of his comics, like it shows up. Like there's swastikas in Ronin. Little Miho has like a swastika. Fucking ninja star.
And talking about Todd McFarlane, Miller's quote was, he said, Todd McFarlane owns the mind of the reader, or the mind that would carve a swastika into their school desk. Like that's a Miller quote. Like,
do you know what it's from?
I think it might be from that book that Fantagraphics put out of like the Miller interviews. They made like a collection of all the interviews. I think it's in there. But he's like McFarlane, and like I'm thinking like is Frank talking about himself and putting it on Todd?
A little projection. Great Varley color. Like I feel like her color game steps up in these last couple issues, and once again with the artist edition, we can see a lot of Frank Miller redrawings in these last two issues. So like we were having conversation before about like, you know, like what is that, and like Klaus's kind of like the back and forth between he and Miller. My projection, my thoughts are that they're seeing the results of the color finally in the first two issues. Not necessarily just the boards with the acetate overlay, but I'm saying they're seeing the actual printed comics, right? So a lot of the redrawn panels that you see in issue 3 and 4, it's really a lot of like simplifying Klaus's like light sources and stuff. There'll be like little wolves, and he's delineating like where the light source is, and Miller is like simplifying all of that, leaving it all open. Once again, that Todd McFarlane panel with the wall exploding, just leave that out. Let Lynn take care of the special effects.
And like where Miller does the most inking is in that like fight with the Joker. And a big thing he is like take away some of the shadow on Joker. Take out some of the thicker lines because the Joker is just pure whiteness.
Yeah.
So you want as little line, like almost like a glare off of him. Talking about how Ronin precedes this. Ronin was a flop. I'll bet if Ronin wasn't a flop, Miller would be inking this too. But I'll bet he had like a little bit of fear. And it's like, let me go back to the original Coca-Cola formula.
Yeah.
Let me get the hit. The hit is Miller Jansen. Let me bring back Jansen. And now he's starting to feel his, he's getting a little more confident. And it's like, okay, and then after that, he does ink more of his stuff, after this work.
One of the things once digital coloring shows up is the role of the inker changes. Up to I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, the inker was tasked with things like weight, volume, atmosphere, texture, all of these things. All of those tasks have been replaced for the most part by the colorist. This is the very first.
Yeah,
this is the early, start
before
of that
computer,
movement.
but yeah.
And some of those battles between Miller and Klaus Janson and the inking probably stems from that.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking some of the stuff that traditionally the inker, Janson, the finisher would handle, and being like, no, Lynn's going to do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that part's kind of neat in that it is ahead of its time, just from that standpoint of like all those responsibilities now we just take for granted. The colorist handles all of that. It's a lot of decision making that this is the first time we're really seeing the colorist take over those responsibilities.
Sticking with the first couple of pages still, we're seeing more of the splinter cells, man. So it's like we have this Nazi wing, and then later on in the issue there will be the Nixons, and then there will be like the Neo mutants.
Mm-hmm.
So the gangs are just
and this
carving
is
territory.
This is the influence of the Warriors.
Yeah,
where it's
totally.
like every gang has its own theme, and he's just trying to think of as many like crazy themes that you could give a gang.
Yeah, and dealing with all this stuff, all the Batman, all the gang warfare and stuff. There's a great page where there's this like buck passing situation that begins with President Reagan, who hands it down to the governor of the state that they never name, who hands it down to the mayor, and it goes all the way down to Commissioner Yindel. It's a good little sequence.
Yeah, I like that. I like pull that trigger and I'll be back for you. He's got everybody on notice.
It's like Judge Dredd or something like that.
Yeah, a lot of great Judge Dredd type, one-liners. When Batman first shows up in like issue 1, it's kind of like a horror movie. It's kind of like Rambo, like the book Rambo or whatever, where you're not seeing him, you're seeing the effect of him.
Yeah.
So he is kind of like Jason or Freddy Krueger. Like you're seeing like somebody get sucked into a doorway, and then it's not until like page 26 that you actually see Batman. So it's like show the effect before you show the cause. And Superman in this is exactly that. We're seeing like he's doing that again with Superman, and it makes a lot of story sense because Superman has to be invisible because he technically doesn't exist. But you're seeing the effect of Superman, and it's so long before you see Superman. So that
a lot of good sequences too, man. That is where we get that yuppie guy Brian Brass Balls, who we will see again later. Who's like, oh yeah, like that this guy forced himself on me, and it really is like you go into the city and you see like the weekend warriors, man, who are like freaked out about like city life, like they don't know how to navigate those situations, man, and that's what that character is. And then of course when the homeless guy or whatever ends up on the train tracks, man, a couple handprints on a subway car, and everybody's all good. All these little great like one-page sequences throughout this whole thing.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways Miller probably did approach this like a newspaper comic or something, like page by page of like each page is like a fresh start, or maybe each 2 pages, but just taking it a page at a time. And
this is the Joker issue.
Yeah, the Joker. Yeah,
and there's some great kind of expressionistic stuff that Miller does with Joker, even early on, whenever he's kind of like doing his Eddie Haskell routine with a psychiatrist guy, and when he's trying to act like feeble and vulnerable, like kind of victim, the way Miller draws him is like super wrinkly and emaciated, like real wrinkly around the eyes, like eyeballs like sucked in and gaunt. And then later on, like as soon as that guy's looking away, he's got the rictus smile, clear face.
Yeah, he's manipulative, narcissist, psychopath, whatever. He plays the victim.
Yeah. So it's a more drawing feeling than like trying to be naturalistic or realistic. You just don't see that in your average jobber comic.
When Gordon's having his like retirement party, there's like this one detail that like always jumped out to me just as like an artist or whatever, where he's like reading from his script and then he like looks up for a second and like his glasses go white catching the glare. Like I just think that's like such like a great little detail.
Yeah, we can make that happen here.
That's a Varley, right? That'd be a Varley.
Well, I don't know, because Miller's drawing like Gordon's eye in all the other panels, and then he looks up, and then it's just
he's really
glasses.
good with glasses. You know, he was really good with Murdoch in glasses and Daredevil. I can remember seeing an original page at Billy Ireland of that. You know,
10,000 hours of drawing a guy in glasses. He's bringing to here.
Yes.
Another trope of the 80s, man, was that Dr. Ruth lady going
Mm-hmm.
everywhere telling you to have sex all day, and there were
Hey, fucking.
there were games, like I remember
the Dr. Ruth video game even.
I don't remember
there was
that,
a board game
but
and a
I
video
remember
game.
being at friends' houses, man, and like the adult games that are like above a thing, man. It was like the Dr. Ruth sex game, and I would just stare at it like, oh, I want to see what's in that thing, man. And then of course, man, we have Dave Letterman, the Dave Letterman sequence. Yeah. I think that makes me notice that like Frank Miller does it like pronounces it endocrine Letterman. You see what I'm saying? But like the sequence, the panel where Joker steps out, and it's kind of like half-page splash, and you see the crowd, and it's just like these faces in perspective at kind of like a soft focus, and then they kind of like go off into nothing. It looks drawn so fast. It looks so good, and I've been tasked with doing similar things where it's like I got to draw like a multitude of people and try to. That's not easy to do. I'm here to tell you that
Crowds
is
are hard.
freaking really tough.
There's the cover of Superman versus Muhammad Ali, Neil Adams, and Neil Adams did his like quick sketch version to figure it out. And it's like that Miller one. It's beautiful. It's all these like just blobs and stuff, but it looks so amazing and so real. And then he did the finished version where it's like, here's Howard Cosell, here's this guy and that guy, and it doesn't work. It sucks.
You know what? I think you really hit on something here, man. And I don't think I was able to put my finger on it until you just mentioned that. But I think that's what Miller and Jansen are able to catch with some of this art. They're able to catch some of that rawness from like a set of roughs, and you do not see that in comics almost ever, where they're able to like retain that energy that's as effervescent as like the
thumbs. Where you would see it is older cartoonists. Older cartoonists would be much more gestural, and I don't know if they worked. You know, maybe working two up meant that it was more forgiving, and so it was almost generational that everything was done quickly, loosely. And I mean, even drawing, we've gone from sort of drawing and moving your arm, and move it your shoulder to like the pen nib inking of the 90s, where it's like meticulously getting in and doing this very controlled stuff. So,
what would you say this paper? It's not quite 2 up.
No, it's not. It's slightly bigger than the average like 11 by 17 paper. I think it's about 12 by 18, 12 by 19. Kind of odd that it's just a little bit bigger, and it's DC paper, so even stranger that it's a little bit bigger, but. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that whenever I was looking at the artist edition, enough that I measured it because it did feel bigger.
It's pretty big, yeah.
Yeah.
That moment where the Joker steps out, it is again that like staging where it's like very minimal. It's like you have a curtain, and it's shot from below, so you don't have to draw the floor, And it's a perfect moment for this character because the Joker is theatrical. He's a clown. He's narcissist. Like this is where he shone. He's in his element now. He's on the stage. All eyes are on him, and he's about to do his thing.
Miller is so good at that, by the way, of just like figuring out the smart way to just communicate things like with simple lines. So like his Batcave, you can't get more simple than his Batcave. It really is just like spiky blobs, and it actually made me think about there was that great annual that he did that Denny O'Neil wrote of like it was a Spider-Man thing, and what has to end up happening is the newspaper press factors in, and what has to end up happening is Dr. Octopus has to get sucked through the offset print machine. So you imagine the complexity of that, the way Miller handles that, amazing. I digress. Let's talk about these bomb kids, because that's the weirdest thing that like I can't put my finger on. I have a million questions about.
This is the Joker issue, like you said. This is the Joker issue. So we're still in Batman's world, but it's Joker's reality bleeds in. So you're getting, crazy stuff. You're getting like you're getting cotton candy and carnivals and evil talking dolls and stuff. We're in his world. The poison lips, mind control lipstick. It's actually because of the Joker's influence in the reality, it's starting to get a little closer to the Batman TV show of the 60s. It is a little more like fun, go, go, go. Like a very dark, nightmarish version of that. But still, yeah. And so yeah, they're like, I guess this guy makes robots, and these robots can fly and levitate and explode and stuff, and they're children for whatever, like he makes them into children's dolls. I mean, I think Miller is just kind of looking around at the world, and he's reacting to Cabbage Patch Kid, and the same way he's reacting to everything, he's reacting to Cabbage Patch Kid.
He has a character like the I think his name was Gladiator in the Daredevil comics, is like a version of that character where it's just like the builder, the guy, like the Deus Ex Machina, like builder character that could just make whatever you need for whatever purposes, and Joker's purposes are nefarious to say the least.
Maybe this is a digression, but Matt Murdock shows up in the previous issue, and he says something along the lines of like, maybe these people could be rehabilitated and helped, and I think that is like where we're seeing Miller approaching this as what this is, as a, like, not his personal worldview, but because when he was doing Matt Murdock would defeat a guy like the Gladiator, and then in the next issue defend him. Matt Murdock was a, whatever you want, like a liberal or like an 80, like Matt Murdock was a yuppie. And so that world, it was a more tolerant worldview in that. And Batman's a different character. Batman doesn't go show up in court the next day to like defend the Joker, or so it is like the difference between the works and not necessarily personal worldviews. But I digress.
Are we at the carnival now?
One pit stop before they get to the fair is with Selina.
Yeah.
And this is where we see the mind control lipstick is introduced there. Fights with the cops happen there. There's
another Master of Disguise gimmick
situation.
Right?
Yeah, where he plays the cop who shows up.
The inspector or whatever.
Whenever he finds Selina, she's wrapped in the Wonder Woman costume.
Yeah, and as a kid, I didn't know what to make of that, and I was like, "Is this Wonder Woman?" I didn't know the lore as much, and it's like, to me, it's just like it's a flirt. Like, he throws in Easter eggs. It's an Easter egg, and it's also like a kink. It's like, you dress up as Wonder Woman, please.
Yeah. So at that point, Yindel and her men show up. Batman punches out the window. He and Robin jump out onto the Batwing to escape. They shoot at him a little bit. Add child endangerment to the list of crimes. And at this point, there's a 6-panel grid within the 16-panel grid structure. There are panels across the bottom, but it's essentially those top 3 tiers. And it's really great of the harness breaking and Robin starting to fall and Batman grabbing her. I think there's reference again at this point to Jason Todd. And you wonder, again, Jason Todd died in Batman's Holy War here at some point. It's a great 6-panel grid reference, and it reminds me of traditional superheroes.
But then with the Frank Miller twist, she hugs him for dear life, and he pets her.
Well, and earlier on, she's looking at Robin's, basically his corpse, his costume hanging up, and then he's like, he was a good soldier, and then he's holding her, and he's like, good soldier. So it's that sinister aspect of that, It's like, her fate going to be the same as Jason, another casualty in Batman's obsessive,
And they make the link of the cotton candy, at this point that they're going.
Yeah.
There's one more tip that he gives Yindel to save the governor.
Governor.
So an example of him sort of building a bridge to this new police commissioner. It's not enough to get her on his side yet, but it is one more piece. He can't get there in time to save the governor, but she could. Her men could. So that's kind of a neat moment. Again, interchanging Gordon for Yindel. It's a pawn in Batman's war.
The cycle's beginning
He
again.
can use the police to help, affect what he wants. And they realize that the cotton candy is the thing the Joker's doing, the county fair, and this is where we see Carrie Kelly sort of speak up, those are my friends there. It's kind of a great moment. It has a lot more weight than, the buildings blowing up and we hear that 12 people died, or the Letterman set, and the crowd dies or whatever. That's kind of meaningless, but seeing one of these characters actually respond, I think is a good moment.
Really
Carrie Kelly is
she's great. Yeah.
This is not a very good story without her.
Yeah, and that at this time there was an argument that, is Batman better off without Robin? Is Robin a relic of the past and shiny and kid stuff? And now that because Batman was getting serious even before this, do we just get rid of Robin? And I think Miller's response is, without Robin, you don't have a Batman. Robin is so much a part of Batman's story that it's just not the same. It can't work. And for years after this, they did take Robin out of the after Robin died, they took Robin out of the equation for a while, and it the balance is off. You need that balance.
So Frank Miller's Batman, he is making sure that he molds this girl into his image, man. And he's a little tone deaf. So he's bringing his Robin to the amusement park after the boys all got their cotton candy.
And are scattered around dead.
And I quote, "A girl of 13 breathes in sharply. Suddenly her innocence is lost. It ends tonight." And it's like, you brought her there. So it's like, here, look at this. Like holding her head. Here, look at your friends.
Well, and Miller doubles down on this in later Batman work. Like when he's revisited Batman a number of times in the decades since then, he doubles down on where Batman is clearly a child abuse. You know,
this is a rough book for Robin. This sequence. You know, she gets involved with that bomber. It's a pretty disgusting reaction that she has to him. You know, implications of the grossness of this character that's all over her, and she's fighting for her life.
And he's a big man child.
Yeah, it's
yeah, and he's like Geppetto or something. Like he could create anything, but he creates these little children, automatons.
This is the dark book in this series. You know, this is
we're in the Joker's
You talk
world.
about reading the first 2 volumes, Ed.
Yeah.
You know, a lot more than these, and looking at even my notes are different for this book. You know, it's just such a different feeling. The whole tone, the pace of this whole book is different than the first 2 or the 4th one.
Because Batman's part of a pantheon, Superman's part of a pantheon. Like I'm looking at Batman's Pluto. You know, he's Lord of the Underworld, and then Superman's Apollo. He's like the god of the sun. But then it's like they're like the Joker. The closest thing in the Greek pantheon is Hermes, and Joker doesn't quite. Joker's got he's got some Hermes in him, but Joker is like almost from a different pantheon. Joker is like a Satan figure or something. Like he's not from that. So it does feel very alien because you're colliding these like 2 pantheons.
This is Batman's like dark secret. It's his unresolved past. There's a sequence early on that flashes back to his dad dying, and I made a note about why is this here? It doesn't make sense. You know, it's like 2 panels. And there's a couple of these that intersperse throughout. And I think it's reference to this idea of, like, by letting Joker live all this time, it just keeps killing people. Like, this is Batman's responsibility. He's never been able to take care of it. And finally, we're going to see him take care of it, presumably. It's a dark. This is the dark. This is the
descent into darkness, and where does this story lead? But into like through the river Styx into the underworld.
Almost literally, yeah. It's really great. And same with the mirror, the Hall of Mirrors that they all go through, and they become interchangeable. You know, it's I don't know when Killing Joke came out, but in a weird way, like this is the same relationship between Batman and Joker that's in Killing Joke and Celebrated. It's here.
They drive it home through the lettering and the coloring too, because there will be captions for Batman's inner monologue that are the same shape as the dialogue balloons for Joker, and they're also both colored the exact same. So so they drive it like straight home.
That's what I thought of. Book 1, you mentioned there are sequences where it's not clear what's happening, the visuals, and to me this is another example of that, where that effect is used, but through word balloons, lettering, coloring of those word balloons shape.
I think like we come into this story with the question, is the Joker my mirror? Is he me? Are we the same? And then we get our answer by the end of this, like whether he is or not.
Yeah, it's the meditation of even more than a mirror, but another element of his personality. Like, we're the same person.
Yeah.
This is the destructive part of me or whatever. And as long as I'm me, this exists. You know, it triggers Joker, right? Joker comes out of hibernation or sleep or whatever at the same time Batman comes out. You know, it's like they're the same character.
Do you want to talk about some of the stuff that's being intercut? Because like we're on this like Joker versus Batman track, but we're intercutting stuff. We're seeing Superman as a weapon of war, and Superman is kind of like I don't know if Superman comics were ever like this, even during World War II, but it is kind of like, you know, Submariner or whatever, where it's World War II and he's like a warrior and he's destroying jet planes. He's with that great, like, where it's just like all black Superman and these red eyes, like Darkseid or something, and you don't see the rays coming out of his eyes. You just see the glow and the effect. And then
Mark Miller was taking notes.
Yeah, right. Sinking. I was taking notes too. Sinking battleships and stuff. You know, aircraft. Like very like it does make me think of like, you know, 1940s and you know, maybe that happened within the body. Like it definitely happened on the cover for some. You know, there'd be some Superman imagery of him like versus, you know, and there was the like Superman versus Hitler story and stuff. But
can we talk a drawing thing about this issue, because it is in that amusement park, and we do see this roller coaster throughout, And Miller has drawn real roller coasters. Like there's an old issue of Daredevil,
Yeah,
man.
one of his first, yeah.
Roger McKenzie written issue, man, where it's like Bullseye and they're fighting on.
Great roller coaster, great sequence.
Yeah, in perspective.
That'd be fun to draw a roller coaster.
That's what I'm saying.
Perspective.
Lots and lots of wooden boards, man. And this roller coaster, it's just like this track going all over the place.
Attached to nothing. Yeah.
Attached to nothing, and it looks great.
Yeah.
And you never question the physics of it. You never question the structural integrity. It is like, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari type imagery where it's like you just need to communicate the idea and let the damn story run its course.
Yeah, and it's cartooning. He plays off of it it moves through, like they move through that thing, and it pays off and plays off. And again, we're in the Joker's world. This is the Joker's version of a roller coaster. It's this insane, irrational thing that just can't exist in reality.
This is the ugliest of the drawings. From a
so far,
thinking of a polish kind of approach. This is where Miller really asserts himself as an inker.
Right.
And I think perfectly apt. The Joker story, the dark story, the ugliest moments of this story. It's clearly reflected in the art. And I had talked before about kind of that contemporary look and almost trying to remove this comic from what we think of as superhero comics and the way those look. Like Ralph Steadman comes to mind. It's very scratchy lines.
Yeah.
It's ugly, it's grotesque, and it's, I think, some of his most effective drawing in terms of capturing what is happening with the characters. It's being reflected in the drawing, in the mark making. It's strange almost, these drawings.
I think
very disturbing when I read them originally.
Once again, man, we need Lynn Varley to hold the whole effort together. She is the load-bearing wall that can make this thing work, because it can become very convoluted otherwise.
For all of the reference to, say, Sienkiewicz and Mazzucchelli's use of line and trying to use line in different ways, this pushes it further than either of those guys ever do. Like, this goes into definitely ugly territory. I think anybody would look at some of these drawings, especially you get to the very last page, and it's almost disgusting. It's almost like he goes too far with it, and he pulls back. He does not continue to work to that degree. It reaches its peak at the biggest moment of this particular volume.
I think it's what that moment demanded, what that moment needed, and I think that might have been where Miller and Jansen's wires got crossed a little, because from Jansen's point of view, it's like, hey, I'm a professional, I'll do whatever you want, and I'll make this job sing for you. And from Miller's point of view, it's like, I have this very specific idea of how this thing has to be, and there's only one person on Earth who can deliver it, and it's me. And that's the area of this book where you do see like all those like Miller inkings.
It's one of those things it's impossible to have a guy of Jansen's level and be like, listen, make it uglier, draw it worse, throw away your pen. Like it's all these things that like you just can't do that as a professional.
And it's like nothing personal. Your inking is great, it's fabulous, but for this particular part, I need to do
Yeah, you
as guys who do all this stuff ourselves, like we can relate,
Right, but you'd be hard pressed to have somebody whose livelihood is, counted on of turning in a page that looks a certain caliber of polish and finish. It is basically breaking all of those
slap
rules.
in the face or whatever. It's just cross wires.
I have a confession to make, man. Again, that 2-page sequence at the end with Joker's demise. It was as confusing to me as page 1. I have to go back.
Well, that's
what I
said.
said.
Yeah,
I have to go back to what I said.
Yeah, legibility.
Maybe the first 10. I think maybe somebody told me what the heck I was reading, because the first
it took
10
me years.
Yeah, me too. It took me multiple readings, and he is trying.
I appreciate your honesty, fellas, man, because there's a lot of liars out there who pretend like they got everything.
I don't think it's accidental that it's built that way either. A lot is happening. As I said, I feel like these are the same characters. It's almost a person at war with themselves. So we see all the dialogue becomes impossible to know who's saying what, who's thinking what, is this a conversation or is this a thought bubble? Like, it's really hard to tell what's going on there. He's being stabbed.
He's communicating
Batman's
some very complicated. He's trying to communicate some very subtle, complicated things. The difference between, like, how do you communicate there's somebody strangling somebody and then the other person finishes the job? That's an insane thing to... like, how do you without doing a super cheesy thing of, like, like a streak coming around. I'm like, there goes my neck, you know, like you know.
Yeah, and then give that to me as a
A kid,
12-year-old
yeah.
kid with like I'm used to Jim Aparo, and
Yeah.
you know, like my vocabulary as a reader is extremely limited. I've never seen a character break their own neck.
I mean, yeah, for many of my readings of this, I assumed Batman killed the Joker. It wasn't until many, many readings that it's like, oh, Batman, and he's like, you couldn't even do it this time. Like, you have every reason in the world to kill me, and you still can't do it. Fuck you, and then I'm going to kill myself. Like,
This is
Batman never killed anybody.
impotent, right? This is,
Yeah, this is a
critique.
this is a sex scene, and Batman, yeah, and it's like, man, come on, you know, like, yeah, Batman got a limp dick, and you know,
Boy, the sex scene part is really a strange way to think of this, considering his relationship with Robin throughout all of Batman history, and this book in particular. That's something I'm now processing like live in the moment.
Now we got to read that all over again.
Yeah, we need to come back in 20 minutes.
but yeah,
But I read it as like it's a statement about superhero comics. There are no like this is fantasy. This is a joke. Like, don't take it too seriously. There's no answer here. You're not going to solve any of these problems through these techniques. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, Batman's completely ineffective at this, and you know that was my takeaway. Like, this is the big Batman moment, and he's nothing. He can't do it.
the Joker is Batman's like view of sexuality and all of Batman's fears of sexuality, and the Joker is very sexual. He's pansexual, and this terrifies Batman. Batman wants so bad to fuck the Joker, but the very idea horrifies him to the core, and so all he can do is punch him and kick him and bite him and throw things at him, and it's like, now's the time for you to really fuck me, and you're limp dick, you know, like this, like, and all through this text, we're being told by multiple characters that Batman's problems are sexual, and Wortham got Batman, you know, killed Batman by saying that Batman is a sexual character, that he's, you know, repressed sexuality and pedophilia and all these things. Like, so it's just this is like a natural progression of these themes that Miller's doing as he explores. And yeah, the things you say about like the superhero, you know, a critique of the superhero, but a critique of the superhero is not as big it's not as like visceral a thing as sort of like sexual terror that it would create such like that cultural critique that you're talking about, or that literary critique that you're talking about is not as powerful as the character's sexual terror, or possibly the author's sexual terror, or the industry's sexual terror, or the, you know.
All right, let's look at it from a non-sexual point of view.
Okay.
I don't know that we've said it on any of these recordings yet, but this is Batman is totally a fascist, the way this work is set up within Dark Knight Returns. So in a way, we could look at this through the idea of like, how does fascism work with somebody like Joker, that's chaos, possibly freedom, defiance, all of these things that the Joker represents compared to a fascist Batman being the fascist. And ultimately the fascism can't defeat the Joker. You know, it can't stop the Joker. Like, Joker stops himself whenever the fascist falls short of being able to put an end to this, to silence him. You know, he's mocking Batman the whole time, and Batman can't stop that.
I don't see that. I don't see it as, because Batman could do all these things. It's Batman's, like, it's actually it's one of the few good things that you can say about Batman in this story. For all of his faults, he refuses to murder because it's so intrinsic to his origin story. But I don't see it as like, you know, the limits of you know, an ideology or a worldview. I do see it as like this is a moment where Miller's giving you a reason to like Batman. Because up until this point, there's a lot of reasons to be like, fuck Batman, this is the last Batman comic I'm ever going to read, and I'm going to throw out my whole collection. You know, this is, you know.
Can I close on saying that I absolutely love the way Vin Varley painted the blood on Joker's hand on that last page?
That's a great close, Ed.
And we can talk more about the sexuality of this scene, because this is a two-parter. This is the first one that's not really, and so the scene continues, and the sort of like Freudian sexual overtones carry over into the next one.
I can't wait to see where you're going with this one. Any more? We're going to close this one out?
No, it's noteworthy that structurally this is different than the first two. The first two really stand on their own, and this is a part one of two.
And this is like Comics 101. If you're doing a comic series, start off with a bunch of one-parters. and then get a little comfortable, get your audience comfortable. Then you do the two-parter. Not really a rule followed anymore, but that is Comics 101.
Today's the day, fellas. We're going to wrap up our Dark Knight Returns coverage. And this issue picks up directly after issue 3.
Yeah, this really is like a continuation, unlike those first 2 books.
So Batman doesn't kill the teenage boy that he chucks up into the lights.
Right.
He doesn't kill the mutant that he shoots with a 50 caliber gun 12 feet away. So when he rigs the body with incendiary munition, the little bombs or whatever, he doesn't kill any cops or whatever.
Yeah, those guys are all armored. They're heavily armored.
I dig it. Okay.
Except for Yindel, who Batman punches in the face.
Because Batman assaults. Batman he's okay with assaulting people and bringing them within an inch of their death, like he did to the Joker, but he refuses to take you all the way to the limit. He refuses to kill. Now, last episode we were talking about the sexual
this is what people are here
ramifications of this fight. Now, remember, okay, it's love, hate, sex, death, these tied dualities.
You're covering your face.
Oh, these tied dualities. Well, that fight scene / sex scene that took place in the previous issue and sort of continued, where we see the aftermath here, takes place in both the river Styx, in the land of the dead, and it's also the tunnel of love. It's both of those things. So we're and this is a book about dualities, about opposites that are actually linked or maybe even the same thing. And so I had sort of teased in the last one that this is very explicitly sexual in nature. This fight scene between Batman and the Joker, and in this one, a parting gift for I forget Batman's exact words, but he spits on the Joker. Which
that's real hateful.
Yeah, but it's hateful and sexual at the same time, because just taken at face value, spitting as sort of like a sexual act, but it's also Batman didn't literally come and then this little wad of whiteness that smeared on the Joker's face.
Fluid bonded.
Exactly. Yeah, fluid bonded is a great thing, but it stands in as the ejaculate.
I like it.
Batman darling is what the Joker keeps saying to him. Batman darling. My one true love, Batman. And I'm your one true love.
Batman fights his way out of this, leaving the burnt up Joker body behind him, relying on Robin to come to his rescue in many ways, who is also shaken by this whole experience. This is a tough moment for Batman and Robin. They narrowly escape. Batman's in bad shape. Robin's in bad shape, but they do get away.
She watches that bomb maker Geppetto guy just bounce down the track, and just with every bounce, just like a water balloon, just more blood, just.
Yeah, and he's decapitated.
Yeah. It's a tough one for her. Her friends, many of them dead on the ground below. It's a tough scene, but they do get away. We go back to the Batcave. Alfred's sewing up Batman, who's been, I was going to say stabbed, but for you, Tom, penetrated by the knife.
You read Daredevil, too. Bullseye and Elektra, the penetration. It's all been clearly documented.
Yes.
There's precedent.
So he gets back there, he's recovering, and Russia launches a nuclear weapon in response to Quarter Maltese and basically Superman's intervention there in that conflict. Superman redirects this nuclear weapon to what he thinks is going to be a harmless detonation point. It turns out it's some super weapon that unleashes a global EMP.
Mm-hmm. Seems like it.
Yeah.
At least across America, knocking out all the power. So momentarily, the medical equipment goes down, causing Robin to think, did Batman just die?
Yeah, did he flatline?
He does not, but everything's wiped out. All the electricity's out. We get our blackout.
This is our blackout of 1977 New York City. People wilding out.
Where were you in the blackout?
I did. Doing that hip hop comic. That's something I had to cover. The blackout of 1977, and everybody has the same story who was there. Where KRS-One would say I went outside to see what was going on, and my teacher was like still in a radio, like and shit, like Mrs. Jenkins, like what you doing, like that kind of thing. And of course we have to get into that area in this thing, but throughout the entire book where Miller's just like needling people and just kind of making fun of people, it's actually plausible. Like you can let it slide almost in this comic because they're not just looking for tchotchkes or television sets. It's like it's a war for food in this comic. You know what I mean? It's not like trying to steal video games from the local department stores or anything like that.
Maybe a misstep by Miller or a misinterpretation. I mean, it adds to the story's gravity just how dark this moment is, but maybe it wouldn't have played out this way.
I mean, I don't know it's a misstep because we are talking about like global nuclear annihilation and stuff. So like this is a different.
That's true. We've seen that escalating in the news, in the television reporting that we've seen. So it is something that everybody within the city, within the country, would have been, thinking of and watching this conflict and realizing there are risks.
The lead up to it is like Harlan Ellison, or now our guest Harlan Ellison. He's talking about and then we cut back and he's like, and mothers eating their children. Okay, thank you, Harlan.
We have the plane fall into Gotham City. One of the a plane overhead, like all electricity goes out, including cars and planes, and we have that crash into Gotham City. We see the shadow of the plane coming down against the building, and then ultimately down into the street.
That was harrowing to see that, and just like to know the reaction of human beings when this happens and stuff like that. It was very uneasy.
That's one of those scenes. It's like the shooting up in the theater that we read that differently now than we would have reacted to it pre 9/11 for sure.
Absolutely.
Talking about like the influence of this work, like the EMP thing got so electromagnetic pulse that shuts down all electricity became such an overused trope. It was kind of new and original and exciting in this, but it got used to death.
Still exists in a lot of conspiracy theory podcasts and stuff, man. There's one coming.
That is covered everywhere. I mean, it's any big budget movie franchise has had an episode, an installment or two that deal with that as a threat. Sometimes that is a reality. It's definitely a popular weapon. At least in the mind of storytellers.
Popular MacGuffin. A cliche.
This is where we see the moment I talked about a couple of episodes ago about Commissioner Gordon and his wife being reunited. It's a very dramatic moment because of the groundwork that Miller lays ahead of time with that relationship, which we never really see. We just hear or we just read Gordon's thoughts, and referencing Sarah, his wife. He's out at the store getting something for her whenever the shit hits the fan. He comes back, his building's on fire. He's relieved to find that she had actually forgotten something else at the store and was out at the store as well. So they get reunited in the backdrop of like Gotham burning.
Yeah, like that's like a nice moment amongst all of this BS, man, because Gotham has never been in more peril than it is like right at this moment. So much so that like Batman needs reinforcements to get everybody to freaking chill out.
And that's where like the bleakness of this stuff is like such a great device, because you expect everything to be a downer and have a bad ending. So then when something sort of like sweet and nice happens, like Gordon finding out that like miraculously his wife's still alive because of some ongoing argument they've had, is very sweet. And so it really like it really hits you just in this like sea of like darkness and bleakness.
I really like just the things about Watchmen and Dark Knight that I really enjoy is just these guys do put an extra level of thought into these characters that just was not explored at the time. So like when that nuclear bomb goes off, there's like a nuclear winter and there's dust and ash covering the yellow sun and turns Superman into like a little skeleton of a
super zombie.
Totally. Really good piece, man. Like that's the piece you see whenever you pick up the book the first time and you look through it, you're like, oh, I gotta check this out. Like, how does that happen? And then he needs that yellow sun, but there's this cloud and he's not even strong enough to fly or anything. So he kind of like siphons like
the solar energy out of a jungle.
Yeah, out of the plants and stuff. And that's just fun.
It's beautiful. Cool. And that Superman where he's the zombie and he's got the lightning bolt coming through him, that's a reiteration of the famous Superman cover from the 40s where he's getting struck by lightning and saying, it tickles. And this time it doesn't tickle.
Yeah, clearly communicated with the imagery in that one.
I love these pages visually. They're so black. The gutters are black.
Mm-hmm.
Does a great job communicating the darkness that has fallen onto
blackout.
at least onto Gotham City. So Batman mobilizes his Sons of Batman from horseback.
Yeah.
He and Robin and a few of the other leaders, I guess, of the Sons of Batman gang, and they basically go about with a vigilante law in Gotham City.
He gets on his horse
and
like a
restore
cowboy.
order, inspire people. It really sort of brings Gotham under control in a way that other cities don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of expressed as they start to claw their way back out of this. I hate to call it nuclear winter because it lasts, I don't know, a week or something.
Yeah.
But whatever this is, a nuclear storm that they're under the cloud of, they're sort of the city that responds the best, and it's due to Batman.
Mm-hmm. Every other city descends into absolute chaos except for Gotham,
right?
Because of Batman. And
we see the payoff of Yindel, and I like this for her character because so often we have these characters that are antagonists and they're two-dimensional. Yeah. They're just evil to be evil. They're oppositional for the sake of opposition. And in her case, she wants to do good by this city, and she sees Batman doing it. And that's her alignment. That's her moment. That's that big FDR moment of like, it's bigger than me. I can't, this goes beyond an arrest warrant or whatever. Mm-hmm. He's doing what I want done, and I can't do it. It's a great moment. It
gives me chills. Like just hearing you describe it, it's like the hairs on my arms are like standing up.
Those are the little detail moments I love. You talk about stuff you like in Watchmen and Dark Knight. It's those detail moments that are just so satisfying as an audience.
When you talk about details, when the news media describe it and they say that there's criticism of Commissioner Yindel for refusing to follow up on the warrant for Batman's, it's a very subtle way of letting us know that she's not going after Batman anymore.
Yeah.
Once again, just using those the TV screens to good effect, move things along, get in, get out with like a quick little snappy story, and then you could get to like the action moments.
Yeah,
and all that.
And by having those TV things, you're seeing sort of lies, half-truths, misinformation, incomplete pictures, which kind of adds another, you're getting information, but it's, you're kind of reading between lines and things. It's interesting.
Again, how contemporary is that?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's 35 years ago that he's doing this, and it's like, that's right now. I mean, that's how much time is devoted to criticizing media now for those kinds of inaccuracies and being influenced by lots of different interests. We see that now. Like, it's pretty perceptive of Miller, certainly a guy who was aware of media at that time.
When the power goes out, all the mutant prisoners, they're all chanting TV, TV, TV. That's the one thing they won't sit still for. You cut off their TV supply.
Brutal scene too, man, where they basically just like, they don't care which mutant is closest to those bars. They're just like squeezing out of that thing, man, using like the upfront mutants as like cushion or something to like push the damn bars loose so that they can escape. And just the way they like come running out of the police station, they're in jail, so I guess it's a police station, and it really is like the Bat Gang in Tim Burton. Like whenever they're about to start painting graffiti on a thing, they're just like jumping downstairs and like
he leapfrogs.
Yeah, leapfrogging dudes and shit like that.
Yeah, when Batman shows up on the horse, that's just such an awesome moment. Just like this, like iconic, and it's like the Lone Ranger, like I was looking for and it's like Lone Ranger and Zorro, and it looks like a chess piece. Like he looks like this, like sculptural. Yeah, Knight.
Conceptually, John Wayne. I'm not sure John Wayne could rear up on a horse like
that.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like John
Wayne.
The
cavalry arriving.
John Wayne was like. Yeah, would have been like a very easy reference back then. An easy thing to, slouching in the saddle. That's
a great moment. That's a great moment as they're like working all through the night together, and Robin is just in her weirdly like this is Robin at the top of her game. It's like she's come through a rebirth from book 3 to this moment. And there's a moment where she looks over and says, she sees him slouching for a minute, and it's kind of him as an old man.
Yeah, you can't
for a minute.
You can't keep that front up forever.
That's a great detail moment because it's so small. Like that is one I'm not sure I noticed it until this reading.
You know what? I think I'm with you. Now, how about this? Like, we're middle-aged or approaching middle-aged guys. our dads are still with us, man. Go hang out with them a little bit, and then you catch those moments like where it's like my dad's an old man. Like I think that might have something to do with it. Like at least in my take, because like when I was going through it, I'm like just thinking about like the various scenarios where I'm like, I felt that with my pops a couple of times.
Yeah, my dad can't ride a horse like that anymore. He can't do the rearing up on the horse.
And I don't know. My dad's a city folk man, and I don't think he ever saw a horse in real life. So this is all preamble, man, because the Superman fight is gonna take place pretty soon, and we have the Costanza straight up comic book lettering.
Yes.
On the thing, right? See, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's total, like, you know, you could see that in any Batman comic, that like in that shape.
Where the where is another Miller doing Kirby thing, I think, because like Kirby had the source wall where like letters in flame would be written, and you know, Superman from this like God perspective, just you know, like Ten Commandments kind of stuff.
And he says Crime Alley, man, and that's the Amsterdam part, man, because it's the most destitute part of Gotham City, man, and they're gonna just use that as a wrestling ring.
Yeah, battleground.
And the army's gonna hold people off, and the cops are holding people off, so that they could have their battle.
And the reason they're having a battle is all through this series, when they'd be passing the buck, the president would say, "Oh," the president almost seemed like he was kind of amused by Batman. It's like, "Oh, that's they have a governor, he can decide." And then the governor's like, "Oh, you know." But then once Batman makes the president look bad and make the governor look bad, you know, then it's like you get that Batman. Like it's interesting to see that turn, because he sets up, you know, that thing, and then it all turns around. Like that's why Superman sent in to kill Batman, is because he embarrassed the president and the governor. He made them lose face.
Miller's a really good caricaturist. Like he did, Letterman, Ted Koppel's in here. Mm-hmm. His Reagan's on point. But when that scene you're talking about, with Reagan putting Superman on the case, he's a crusty old man.
Yes.
With like his hair. He
seems like he aged so much between his last appearance in the comic.
Yeah, it's almost like Alfred. It's like it's all fugazi, you know. It's all fake shit. And he's like on a Segway scooter or something, man. Like a little
because he's not making a TV appearance, maybe.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like this is the real president. This is the real guy. This is Bonzo, straight up.
I was surprised reading the fight scene. Tremendous fight scene, so great. One of my fond memories, one of the things I distinctly remember from reading this 30 years ago and every time since, the big showdown, right? This is the money moment in this series. 6 pages.
Yeah.
It feels epic. It feels like the whole graphic novel is this showdown. It's 6 pages. Very carefully choreographed, and
there's good stuff leading up to
effective.
It. You know, like the green arrow stuff, and the conversation they have there, where it's just like, yeah, man, you make too much noise. Like, they let me do my thing, and I don't let them see me, and everything's good.
He says that, and then they cut to this news report about a nuclear submarine sinking, and I wondered if that was like that he caused that, like almost like a Greenpeace kind of thing, or if it's just more of the EMP stuff. But it is interesting that he's saying, they let me do whatever I want. Nuclear submarine sinks, and then we're back to the conversation.
I didn't catch that one on my read, actually. That's good.
You got Green Arrow, and he's a one-armed archer, and you can see even he can hold his own.
Yeah,
like he's still a superhero, and then that sort of extends to Batman, because prior to this comic book, if you said to anybody who would win in a fight, Batman or Superman, you'd be like, well, that's ridiculous. Of course Superman. Like, it's not even a question.
That's the fun thing about this, because you're playing with these nonsense, like, you know, comic book characters, these superhero characters, all that stuff. So like one of the things that Miller set up for himself is like, how can I get Batman to kill Superman?
Yeah.
And you know,
and now
you can't come up with that like willy nilly. Like you got to put a little bit of thought into.
And it's become a cliche now, where it's the other way now, where it's like, well, Superman doesn't have a chance against Batman. Batman's smarter. Batman's gonna kill. Like it's turned around totally. And this is a Kirby thing too. Kirby said that any one of his characters could beat any of his other characters. They just had to think their way through it. And you see that play out in Kirby's world, where like, you know, Jimmy Olsen could kill Darkseid if he really sat down and thought about it. And that's what this is. Batman sat down and thought about it. And
Miller sets it up good too because of the whole diverting the warhead and stuff. It still screws everything up, and Batman is able to just castigate the guy. Ah, you freaking idiot.
Yeah, he doesn't read anything he says.
Yeah.
well, this is like in a comic when like Thor gets defeated because Odin took away half his powers before that. This is exactly that kind of Marvel trope.
Well, there's what I was saying, just setting the thing up
Uh-huh.
to the point that it's like that he's basically calling Superman a tool. Like
Yeah.
Superman is just a tool.
Mhm.
So he's not going now. They set up the scenario to like destroy the tool.
One of Miller's great strengths in Daredevil was he would choreograph fights
Yeah.
really well. And this was something that's not really done. You know, you think of Kirby as setting so much of the language of comics, but his fights are not choreographed. They're sort of like these impact moments, and they're dramatic and they look good. Miller would choreograph fights, you know, like each move would sort of follow each other and stuff, which was pretty unusual. A
And
lot of cartoonists didn't.
Think about Miller's era. He's watching Kung Fu movies. Kung Fu movies made a big splash around the time Miller came into comics.
He's very thoughtful with that stuff, and I don't know if it comes from a manga influence, Kung Fu movies, just personal interest. I don't know, but it's atypical, and it is on display in this fight. You know, like it is just like moment, like just this almost dominoes falling as we go through these 6 pages. And it just escalates, you know, like each piece builds on the previous one. It gets bigger and better. It's incredible. Like I said, I was shocked reading it and going back and counting the pages and just being like, this is remarkable, because it does feel like this epic big battle, but it's really almost sleight of hand for Miller, just like laying this thing out perfectly, walking you through this as it unfolds. People just didn't do that, you know, and I don't know even now if cartoonists do that level of choreography in their fighting.
I think of how street level this whole series started, and how we've like little by little amped up to now we're in this like realm where it is almost like a Kirby comic. It's like gods and like and he's fighting the most powerful being on it. Like this is that like fugue state that Miller got in. Like he somewhere between the beginning of this thing and somewhere around issue 3, he almost turns into a different cartoonist, and every move he makes is like the right move. Everything's golden, and it's like it's that kind of state that like doesn't last forever either. But he's on it. Like we're seeing it. We're seeing his peak.
It's rare that stories do this, where they sort of deliver in the like everything builds to the climax. You know, often you have those great moments. They're uneven.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare that the thing just escalates into this great crescendo that he achieves with this fight.
Yeah. I mean, just like your reading of this, like as a kid, like I had read a World's Finest comic where Superman at the end says to Batman, like, if I ever go out of control, like we need somebody to like stop me. So I'm like, he gives him in a case a thing of kryptonite. He's like, here's some kryptonite.
An act of friendship.
Yeah, you have this kryptonite. So if I ever get out of control, you can stop me and stuff. And so my thought, like as a kid reading this, is like, oh, that he had that kryptonite that Superman get, like that. Everything's connected. You know, like every little bit. You know.
I remember reading, I think it's a Legends comic, and this would have been way after Dark Knight. You know, this was probably early 2000s. Maybe it came out like Kevin Nolan did the finishing, but it's like Robin's first encounter with Superman. And he's so, you know, like he's impressed, he's in awe, you know, he's enthralled by his charisma.
Superman's more his style than Batman. Him and Superman would get along
and
real
I
good.
I'm sure I'd react the same way if Superman showed up. But Batman, Bruce Wayne just takes it completely the wind out of his sails, and he's like, just remember, he's an alien. Like, he's not even human.
He's gross.
Yeah, it's looking down his nose at, like, he's not even human. And I have to think that stems from sort of this interpretation of their relationship.
Well, there's eventually you outgrow this, but there is like Marvel and DC thrive on this illusion that everything's connected. And of course, you read enough Marvel or DC comics, you realize it's just a bunch of bullshit people are making up. But there is an age where you do buy into the fact that every little, and that this is where Batman is really heading. You know, this is I'm reading what's happening, and every little bit's connected.
Anything else on the story itself?
Do you enjoy the ending, where everything went? I read it several different ways over the years myself. Like as a kid, I read it like, okay, Bruce Wayne is back, and he's like a troop leader or something. You know what I mean? Like he's like a den leader of Boy Scouts. And then clearly, like, what's really going on is he's like establishing his militia
Yeah,
or whatever.
he's planning for an eventual takeover of the world.
The thing that I'd never have seen in all of my readings, I must have read this thing dozens of times, is at the bottom of that very last panel, you see that Green Arrow is a part of the gimmick. Like he's there with his skullet and his crossbow,
and they're going off the grid. You know, he's become like a survivalist. And Miller had like an alternate ending, like an alternate way he had planned for this thing to end, which would be that in his fight in Batman's fight with Superman, Batman loses or gets captured. Like there's interference, and Batman gets captured by the CIA or whatever, and then he gets put in like a hospital, and they're gonna like keep him alive, and that the CIA guy says, we're gonna give you your own branch, like your own department to run, like you're gonna work for us now, just like Superman. And then Batman takes like the tube out of his life support and starts stabbing his own arm, and in his arm he's buried a cyanide capsule, and he pulls out the cyanide capsule, bites it, and then he dies. And then we go to the funeral and stuff. And then, just like in this book, and then the ending, instead of that sort of like gentler, like almost like scout leader, but like hinting at bigger, darker things, it was unquestionable. He's like King Kull or Conan or something, sitting on his throne underground in like the underworld, fires blazing and this like crazed look in his eye, in full Batman costume, as like, we are going to take the world back. The end, which, when he did Dark Knight 2, that's kind of where he picked up off of. He picked up off of not his actual ending, but his unused ending to continue the story.
Is there a place we could find that stuff?
I know, like some of the printings of Dark Knight Returns contain Miller's
like
synopses and stuff, and it's in one of those.
Legacy.
I start reading comics about 2 years after, probably, late 80s, 88, 89. And it feels like all superhero comics are built on this comic. This premise of like, shifting from comics being aimed at kids, especially superhero comics, to being more adult, more angsty. The characters, we're seeing sex and violence and death. All of those things were just part of superhero comics when I started reading. And at some point, it just became horrible to read. Like so much
Very
of that
quickly.
was just like this drag. And, I kind of quit this stuff in the early 2000s, but really probably in the mid 90s.
Yeah, sure.
And by the early 2000s, it felt like it was still the same stuff, just this like morose, bummer.
It's only now,
world.
like at least like the mainstream and stuff is only now starting to sort of climb out of it.
The mainstream business of comics, like they really, once something hits, once something connects, they are going to squeeze all of the juice out of it, man. And I mean, geez, like when New 52 started and stuff, and you're going to get, we have this new universe, and we're going to get Jim Lee to like make a bunch of like, 1990s looking like Superman stuff, and
right in 2005.
Yeah, like
and I mean, he's a guy who points back to Frank Miller and Dark Knight Returns as being this huge foundational work for him. So, that's a continuation of that legacy. I think you lose a generation of kid readers and everything that comes with that. There was a period where people would talk about, we need to have more all ages comics, and I think it's a direct result of probably the publisher seeing the success of this, wanting to emulate that, and then making all of their stuff target an older demographic.
Mm-hmm.
We often joke about the guys, the Wednesday Warriors, and what that profile is, and it's 44-year-old. It's me. I'm that profile,
right?
And that's fine. It's great that there are books made that would interest me. But there was a gap there for several years where like that kid, that all ages group just wasn't being catered to. And I think things suffered. I think newsstand kind of shrunk up and went away as a result of that.
The stuff that we did have, I would not call it all ages, but I certainly wouldn't call it adult or it's devoid of pathos and all that. But like, this is where our Image guys come in, man.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where our McFarlanes and our Liefeld, and it's like, that's as fun as we could get. Like the fun stuff that we had access to was like a guy with a little zappy eye with like a giant gun, but like they never shot it. Like,
Yeah.
I think the most grotesque thing that ever happened in a Liefeld Marvel comic was when that one Mutant Liberation Front guy gets his hand cut off by Shatterstar.
Not a lot of blood there.
No.
We read this as children, and so like when you talk about the thing and things going more adult, it seemed adult to us because it was older than us, but it's actually adolescent.
No, it's very much
adolescent.
So.
Yeah.
World. I as a boy, when I was figuring stuff out, like I drew the entire first issue, copied it, but I had no confidence in my hand lettering ability, so I had my mom letter my comic for me because her penmanship was far better. And I knew it to be a serious work and something that like all of my heroes reference as being like an extremely important comic. Like, this is elevating the medium. And my mom is sitting there laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? And she's like, this is really stupid. Like this is really silly stuff, man. Like this is like hot needles in my face, blah, blah, blah. Like all this stuff. And it was actually my mom who pointed me toward Mickey Spillane because my grandfather like read Mickey Spillane books, so she's like, this guy's trying to be like a Mike Hammer or something.
That's
like,
pretty great.
Yeah,
she had that connection that she could connect that dot.
Yeah,
those dots.
Yeah, it was similar with like Tarantino and stuff because I saw like Pulp Fiction with my dad, and I thought it was the most amazing like original thing. My dad's like, this stuff's as old as the hills. These are all cliches that they just weren't familiar to me because I grew up in a different era.
I think all of the Batman movies. Like Tim Burton not the 1960s Batman movie, but Burton and Christopher Nolan, I think clearly that's a legacy. The characterization, I think, of Batman and Bruce Wayne and Gotham City, I think all can point back to this.
Absolutely. And sort of too bad in a way.
Yeah, I think too bad.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fun territory that you could explore
and
with that character.
They've come back. Like there was a few years ago, there was a Batman animated series that was called like Batman Brave and the Bold or something, where it was bringing back like the fun to Batman, and it was more of like a 60s Marvel approach to Batman, which I think is. And so Batman's reached such a critical mass that now there's finally enough iterations that you can start having like a fun Batman. But the darkness does work well for Batman. The thing where the legacy hurt for me and made me kind of lose interest in comics a little bit was when it starts spreading to characters like Spider-Man, who, like, with all his pathos, still has, like, a sense of fun. When Spider-Man started turning into, like, he's going to slit his wrists and stuff, it's like I wanted to see, like, what I saw in the cartoons when I read the comics. I was like, this isn't for me.
The other big legacy, I think, is bookstore distribution. Like, we're sitting here, I think my copy is a 12th printing, and it's from, 86 or 87. Like, it was in no time at all that these things made it through all these different versions and were being sold in outlets. The bookshelf was a new outlet for this stuff, and it's become a huge, huge part of comics. The rival of the direct market would be things like Amazon at this point. And I think 86 is is the pivotal year. It's this and Watchmen and Mouse that really were like, make this push into the book market. I remember Rolling Stone article, and it was like, Biff Bam Pow, comics aren't for kids anymore. Yeah. This is a big chunk of that. And I think all those things work together. I would often hear people say they couldn't sustain it. There weren't enough works of this magnitude to really keep that shelf, populated. But that generation then grew up and became the filmmakers and the publishers and the editors that sort of did make the successful push of, making American comics for all audiences, really. Like no longer looking at comics as limited to just children's media, but finding ways like, we have comics for everything now. You can all read them. It's not much stigma against it anymore. Put them in libraries, put them in schools, put them in bookstores. And I think this is a pretty big brick in that wall, that movement.
It's interesting too, because like I have the 8th printing here, DC comic. Yours is a 12th Warner Books. So like, does Warner get a different kind of distribution than a DC book? Like there's got to be some sort of shell game that they're playing there business wise, man, that they're able to get more distribution by way of like this Warner imprint. And I think I have the Warner Watchmen too. But man, I was there. I was very little, but I remember those dismal times of like, you go into like the Walden Books. This will be there. Watchmen was not that accessible back then. I never saw Watchmen in a Walden Books, but there would be like, Mouse would be there. I remember a Doubleday collection of American Splendor comics. There was Elf Quest, and all done, and it was Dungeons and Dragons manuals right
Yeah,
next
that's where
to
you
it. You know what I
find it.
mean?
And,
Just
and then you take a walk down to the humor section,
You're
and you'd
right.
have Doonesbury
Yes.
and Garfield, and then maybe if you're lucky, a Calvin and Hobbes. You know?
You're right. Yeah, that would be a whole new section of like,
Yeah.
and that would be full.
Yeah, that would be packed. Yeah, Beetle Bailey. Just talking about this, since we're talking about this edition, just like talking about Alan Moore's introduction.
Yeah,
To the book.
1986. Mhm.
Yeah, and his introduction, it's almost like his intro is a rough draft for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, because he's talking about like
Quatermain.
yeah, he talks about Alan Quatermain. He talks about and it's funny, he talks about Tarzan, and it's like, how come Tarzan never figured into the League? He
James Bond. He
yeah,
talks
James,
about
James
in that
Bond,
thing.
and he talks about like when you view these things under that lens, you know, James Bond is awful, you know, Quatermain's racist, Tarzan is sexually experimenting with chimps, is what he says. So it's like, and he also does an intro to when they collect his Swamp Thing. Alan Moore writes an intro, and he does even more rough drafting. He's talking about Sherlock Holmes, and he's talking about imagine, if you would, a crossover where Dr. Frankenstein kidnaps one of the girls from Little Women, and Sherlock Holmes has to solve the case. You know, it's just funny to me that like we're seeing like the genesis.
Yeah, and basically what he's talking about is just like as the access to information is more accessible to the general public, it doesn't necessarily jade us as audience members, but it just we become too smart for the silliness of what has come before in terms of our pop culture mythologies and stuff like that. So just good.
Something he said that in that intro that stuck with me is he said that we talk about superheroes as a modern mythology. It's a mythology. Superman is a Batman as a legend or whatever. But you're not really a legend or a mythology until you have an ending. You know, Robin Hood has an ending. The Knights of Arthur have an ending, and that's what Miller provides here. He provides a capstone to the story of Batman, and that stuck with me as a reader. But it also stuck with me as a creator. That your work really means something once you put a capper on it and say where things go. Like,
we've been chatting about Dark Knight for about 3 hours. should we put a cap on that, or do you have a couple more notes?
No, I think that sums up everything I pretty much have to say. The last bit of legacy I would talk about is Miller and what this 1986 is. This leads into Batman Year One, which really sort of makes him the authority and the voice that defines Batman, beginning and end, Alpha and Omega. But as a cartoonist, he's 29, maybe 30 around this time. And the output's remarkable.
Insane.
I'm looking back at myself 12 years ago.
yeah.
Heck, I could look in the mirror now. I'm not doing anything on any of this level. And he does all of this plus more. Elektra Assassin is in that time period. Elektra Lives Again is in that time period. The Daredevil Born Again storyline is in that time period. And it's all really in this, between a year and 2 years of output that is just remarkable. And just sets a stage for a lot of where comics goes. It's kind of the culmination of the first part of his career, and it is just fireworks and grandeur and things that we haven't seen before. Alan Moore's introduction sums it up better than anything I'm going to say right now. But he does take the superhero genre that's at this point been the same for 50 years.
Yeah.
And he changes it.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen very often.
And I think Miller, after that creative mania, that spate of all those works, he really needed a nap after that. Like he would, like you can't do this much work at this level for very long before you need to just power down for a little bit and get your bearings.
And he does.
And probably financially sets him up to do things like Sin City and 300.
You just need this.
And stuff that continues, to sort of advance things. And,
Yeah,
to advance the movement, the legacy that he starts with this, he pushes forward by making this other work that then is licensed and moved on to other media and different audiences, and just continues to sort of grow and proselytize comics to wider readership.
That's the thing, man. Like he did this work. He pretty much, this set him up for everything.
Yeah, created a blockbuster.
And you could. This proves your mettle, because he continued to innovate. He continued to have his love affair with the comics medium, And that's different than a McFarlane or like a Liefeld, who like they got set up and then they just kind of like, they did their thing a little bit more for themselves than for like the medium of comics. Right. But this guy really cares about the this medium that he's been using for 30, 40 years at this point.
Yeah, he reshaped the comics medium a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe gave it a few more decades than it might have gotten otherwise.
That's possible, man. Shit, I'm exhausted, fellas.
Yeah, you got that right.
And we haven't changed our clothes for weeks. Let's get the heck out of here. You guys know what to do. Like, subscribe, and follow the YouTube channel. Hit the bell icon, and it'll let you know whenever we have new vids available.
You can find our Cartoonist Kayfabe merch in our spread shop at the link below this video. It's one of the ways you can support us.
Just like Frank Miller after his 1986 output, we have to go take naps. But you guys know what your marching orders are.
Read more comics.